Chapter 529. Although today was not a holiday, the scenic spot was still crowded with tourists from all over the country. According to the latest information received, there were about 30 to 40 troublemakers, and they disguised themselves as a tour group to blend in with the tourists. Therefore, as soon as the operation personnel received the news, they immediately locked on to the tour group that had just passed through the end gate and was slowly walking toward Tiananmen Square. All groups, listen up, you must take down this group of people as soon as possible. Remember, if you encounter resistance during the mission, you can kill them on the spot. Move! In an instant, countless operation personnel disguised as tourists gradually flocked toward the tour group from all directions. However, when the operation personnel really approached the tour group and saw the faces of the troublemakers in front of them, they suddenly felt a storm in their hearts. Many people were so scared that they quickly stopped and began to hesitate whether to continue to go forward and arrest them. Are these the troublemakers mentioned in the emergency report? Before seeing this tour group, everyone thought that the target of today's mission was some kind of vicious and crazy terrorist. Who would have thought? At this moment, what appeared in front of them was actually a tour group of elderly people. The elderly people wore the same clothes. They wore a small red vest with the travel agency logo on their upper bodies and a white baseball cap on their heads. Among them, the older ones had white hair, so the operation personnel estimated that these elderly people were at least 70 or 80 years old. Even the youngest among them was about 60 or 70 years old. If this tour group was placed on Chang'an Street, it would probably be a superstar group of scammers. Who would dare to provoke such a team? Could it be Wu Lian's information was wrong? At that moment, not only were the operation personnel in charge of the arrest a little confused, but even the supervisor behind them was stunned. While everyone was hesitating, this elderly tour group acted as though nothing had happened and walked past the Tiananmen Gate Tower casually. F***CK. What the hell is your intelligence group doing? Come, I'll let you see with your own eyes. This is the F***King operation target you told me about. On the Tiananmen Square. The operations supervisor of this mission was communicating with the intelligence group in exasperation. These elderly people in front of him had trouble even walking. How could they be the troublemakers mentioned by the intelligence group? Isn't this nonsense? Don't worry, I'm checking the situation here, right? On the other end of the phone, the director of the intelligence group was also very anxious. How could such a big mistake be made? That's impossible. While the operation team and intelligence group repeatedly confirmed the target's information, the elderly tour group slowly walked out of the passage under the guidance of the tour guide and came directly under the president's statue. Soon after, a shocking scene occurred. After these old men walked out of the city gate tower's passageway, they neatly lined up in a 6x6 square formation as if they had rehearsed it beforehand. Then, they all sat cross-legged on the ground. From the beginning to the end, these elderly people did not make a single sound. Wait. Something happened. They're staging a sit-in. Unlike ordinary protesters, this super Pengzi group was small in number and their behavior was very strange. The tour guide was the only middle-aged man. After seeing his tour group doing such a shocking thing, he did not stand up to stop them. Instead, he directly walked past the crowd and stood in the first row of the group. The tour guide stood while the elderly people sat. When the passing tourists saw this scene, they could not help but stop and stand nearby and whisper to each other. What's going on? What's going on? Is something big going to happen? Where's the phone? Take a picture. As more and more people gathered in the square. After taking a deep breath, the tour guide faced the elderly people and slowly sat on the ground. Then, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide recited in front of everyone in the room, with a cadence of intonation. This is the beginning of the end. Shen cultivator, the ancestor of nature, and the great sect of thousands of people. It's profound, so it's called subtle. It's continuous, so it's called wonderful. It's high, so it covers the 9 heavens, so it's wide, so it covers the 8 corners. It's as bright as the sun and the moon, so fast as lightning. It's as bright as a flash, or drifting like a stream of stars, or rippling like a deep pool, or flying like a cloud. This passage came from a Taoist classic. Naturally, ordinary people would not understand what he was saying. But for the members of the operation group, this passage was no less shocking than a sudden clap of thunder. It was inexplicably shocking. This is a cultivation technique? He's preaching? Quick, stop him. Hearing the manager's angry roar from the headset, the staff suddenly came back to their senses. Then, they no longer cared about shocking the world. In front of all the tourists present, they directly pounced on the elderly tour group fiercely. However, just as one of the operation members was about to get close to the elderly people, an invisible force suddenly sent him flying and he fell heavily on the wall of the tower. Bang! With a muffled sound, the operation member, who was only at the mid-stage of concealing strength, fainted on the spot. At this time, the manager of the operation group suddenly realized that these elderly people, who seemed to be on the verge of death, had secretly set up a defensive array under the tower according to the arrangement of the 36 Big Dipper gods. Fu Xian Dao, obtain from the inside, guard from the outside, use from the spirit, forget from the weapon. This is the essence of Xian Dao. Obtain from the noble. Do not wait for the power of the yellow axe. The body is rich, do not need the rare goods. Too high to be climbed, too deep to be fathomed. Riding on the flowing light, driving the flying scenery, penetrating the sixth void, penetrating the cold. Beyond the supreme, into the supreme. The tour guide sitting at the front did not seem to notice Wu Lian's sudden action at all. He still closed his eyes and continued to recite to himself. The onlookers did not know the truth. They only felt that this person's behavior was a little strange, so they used their mobile phones to record the entire process of him preaching. Back off, back off. Stop taking pictures. We are carrying out a special mission. Please cooperate with us. Thank you. After all, this incident happened under the Tower of Tiananmen. The operation members did not dare to forcibly break the array, so they could only temporarily drive the onlookers away from the scene. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you pushing me? Which department are you from? How would I know who you are without a uniform? I'm telling you, you better show some respect. I'm not leaving. What can you do about it? Come on, come hit me. Wu Lian wanted to clear the area, but the onlookers did not agree. The elderly tour group in front of them did not kill anyone, and they did not set off any fire. What was wrong with them sitting there silently and watching from the side? Was it illegal to sit still? Was it illegal to watch from the side? Wang Chuanju had thought of everything, but she did not expect. Chapter 530. Come here to shock the virtues, spread the teachings under the gate tower. In this day and age, traffic could be converted into cash. As long as there were people watching online, there would naturally be money to be made. Therefore, as soon as this elderly tour group sat down, someone next to them picked up their phone and started filming the entire process. According to the Public Security Administration punishment law, this tour group's behavior had seriously disrupted the order of the square, so the square security personnel had the right to expel them. The operation personnel wanted to forcibly take this elderly tour group away, but due to the fact that there were too many tourists around, they did not dare to make too much of a commotion. Since they could not force their way in, they could only set up a cordon and wait for backup. While the operation personnel were anxious, the middle-aged man dressed as a tour guide sat on the ground, turning a blind eye to everything that was happening around him. Even though Wu Lian's operation personnel had already stood in front of him and tried to dissuade him, he still ignored them. Instead, he continued to chant some kind of unknown scripture. The middle-aged man's voice was not loud, but everyone present could clearly hear the scripture he was chanting. This kind of behavior was a little strange no matter how one looked at it. It would definitely go viral on the internet. Therefore, many tourists directly picked up their phones and started filming the entire process, so this scene instantly spread all over the internet. Don't film. If you film again, I'll confiscate all their phones. Seeing that the situation was gradually getting out of control, the director in charge of this operation made a prompt decision and directly ordered the confiscation of everyone's phones. Some of the tourists were frightened and ran away on the spot. However, some tourists were very hot-tempered. Seeing that the operation personnel were about to confiscate their phones, not only did they not dodge, but they also pointed their cameras at the operation personnel and kept shouting, "Come, everyone, come and see, the security guards of Tiananmen Square are violently enforcing the law." For a moment, the situation was a little out of control. Just as Wu Lian was busy driving away the onlookers, the four celestial beings who had heard the news also arrived at the scene and directly launched a strong attack on the array formed by the elderly people. These elderly people seemed to have cultivation, but they had not been cultivating for long. Among them, the most powerful one had probably just touched the threshold of the qi refinement stage. Therefore, as soon as the four celestial beings launched an attack, the entire array suddenly shook. But at this moment, the tour guide suddenly stopped chanting. Then he slowly stood up from the ground and said to the people around him, "Everyone stop. I've done what I have to do. I'll go with you now." As soon as the middle-aged man finished speaking, the elders behind him all stood up from the ground and quickly walked to his side. From the looks of it, these old people in their 70s and 80s seemed to be following the lead of this middle-aged man. Seeing this, the operation personnel could not help but look at each other, as if they could not understand the actions of the person in front of them. "There are too many people here. Hurry up and take them away." After the middle-aged man surrendered, the supervisor quickly rushed down from the tower. For the sake of safety, the supervisor signaled for the operation personnel to handcuff all the old people in front of him. Regarding this, the middle-aged man in the lead seemed to be quite dissatisfied. Thus, he went directly to the supervisor and pleaded for these old people. "These old people have only been cultivating with me for a short period of time. Today, they are only here to cheer for me. May I ask what crime they have committed? If you insist on denouncing them, then go ahead and take me back. This has nothing to do with them. Don't worry if I really want to cause trouble. Today, I won't preach here, and I won't surrender without a fight." Hearing this, the supervisor had no choice but to take a serious look at the person in front of him. To be honest, if he really had to forcibly take these old people away in front of all the tourists present, there might be some bizarre negative news on the internet tomorrow. And according to the information that Wu Lian had received before, the instigator of everything today seemed to be this middle-aged man in front of him. Therefore, after hearing the middle-aged man's words, the supervisor immediately walked to the side. After a short discussion with the higher-ups, the final decision was made. Take this person back. The others go to the side and register in order. If there are no problems, let them go. The middle-aged man seemed to be very satisfied with this arrangement. Thus, he turned around and whispered some instructions to the old people. Then, he took the initiative to follow the supervisor into a bus not far away. Throughout the entire process, the old people present did not say a word. They all seemed to listen to the middle-aged man in front of them. Therefore, after the middle-aged man was taken away by Wu Lian, only a few old people could not suppress the sadness in their hearts and silently shed tears. On the bus, as usual, Wu Lian began to interrogate the middle-aged man. "What's your name? Where are you from? Do you know what you've done today?" Wu Lian had to treat this celestial being with caution. Therefore, once the man got on the bus, the operation personnel handcuffed him with special stainless steel handcuffs. "My Taoist name is Yujing. Since I was born in Wuxia, then I'm from Wuxia. Is that how you answer? Speak human language." The investigator was very dissatisfied with the middle-aged man's attitude, so he pretended to be fierce and slammed the table. Seeing this, the middle-aged man was not offended at all. Instead, he chuckled and said, "Looking at your arrangements today, it seems like you're afraid that I'll do something evil here? You gathered people to spread religion and tried to mislead people. Isn't that evil? Is that so? Haha." Hearing this, the middle-aged man who called himself Xianxia suddenly shook his head and laughed. "I'm just following the will of the heavens. I don't seek selfish desires. I'm only doing this for the common people. Now that the golden age is coming, the ancient path is flourishing. Since the Wu Lian is the weapon of the country, how can we just block and expel them and forcefully cut off the path of cultivation? As the saying goes, it's better to lead than to block. What's the difference between such a forceful and foolish method and the tyranny of ancient times?" Hearing Xia's words, the investigator was amused. "You know about the Wu Lian too? I almost thought that you've become stupid from cultivating in the mountains." Ha ha. There was no point in saying anything more. The middle-aged man was a proud man. Seeing the investigator's bad attitude, he shook his head lightly, closed his eyes and said nothing more. After all, he had done what he had to do. Even if the Wu Lian wanted to punish him, he would not have any complaints in his heart. A single spark could start a prairie fire. As the forerunner, he was the first to light this fire. Now, it was time to see when this fire would burn. Chapter 531. Inside the courtyard. After listening to the conversation between Xianxia and the investigator, Xianxia silently retracted his divine sense. He finally understood everything and the cause of today's farce. Jingzi. This person's cultivation was not high, but his ambition was very great. Just like Prometheus in Western mythology, Jingzi did not do this for fame or profit. He was willing to take the risk of angering the Wu Lian and forcibly sprinkle a seed of fire in this world for the sake of his ideals. This Tao fire. It was the flame of inheritance that had been extinguished for a long time. Since the first appearance of the heaven and earth anomaly, the heaven and earth spirit qi on earth had been recovering for nearly 2 years. 2 years, to Chen Shi, was just a snap of the fingers. In addition, he was a fat otaku who never left the house, so he naturally did not pay too much attention to the many subtle changes in the outside world. So what if it was recovering? At his level, the spirit qi was no longer the only condition to improve one's cultivation. Therefore, after the initial shock and excitement, Chen Shi completely threw this matter to the back of his mind. Time flew by. Nian Yan was already 7 years old. As long as 2 to 3 years had passed, many incomplete inheritances left behind from ancient times gradually flourished. What Jingzi recited under the city tower today was an incomplete cultivation manual from ancient times. To Chen Shi, this cultivation method was so simple that it was almost crude. However, to ordinary people who had never come into contact with cultivation methods, this cultivation method was comparable to a priceless treasure. There were always geniuses in the world who were far superior to ordinary people. They only needed to cultivate step by step according to the cultivation method, and they might really be able to successfully step into the immortal sect. Qi refinement was just the beginning. However, this simple step seemed to be separated by mountains and seas and a natural moat. Take a step back and be mortal. Take a step forward and you will become an immortal. The difference between immortal and mortal was ultimately just a step. The ancestor once said, Confucians use literature to break the law, while chivalrous people use martial arts to break the law. With the recovery of spirit qi and the gradual rise of inheritances, the existing social order on Earth would definitely be severely impacted. Not to mention, the threat that the cultivators posed was far greater than that of ordinary firearms. Once they succeeded in their cultivation, they would be able to overturn mountains and seas and pluck stars and moons with just a wave of their hands. They would be like human-shaped nuclear bombs walking on the streets. And when cultivators possessed such strength, who could guarantee that? Could they be like Chen Shi, who stayed at home all day, taking care of their children and playing with their cats? One person could destroy a city. One person was enough to overturn a country. Although the world is big, I am the law. Where could they not go? Who did they not dare to kill? Therefore, 2 years ago, Wu Lian confirmed that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth was beginning to recover, and that the ancient legacies were beginning to show signs of emerging. Together with the military, they came up with the first 5-year plan. Within 5 years, Wu Lian would do everything in his power to cultivate as many cultivators as possible who were loyal to the motherland. These cultivators, who were personally trained by Wu Lian, were one of the important pillars that Wu Lian would rely on to maintain the security of Wuxia in the future. In addition, Wu Lian strengthened their control over the cultivation world. For the cultivation legacies that had existed long before the spiritual qi recovery, Wu Lian mainly used coercion and enticement. While promising them all kinds of benefits, they also threatened them with nuclear bombs. Either they joined the Wu Lian, or they waited for the nuclear bomb to be leveled. There was no room for negotiation. Otherwise, as time went on, once an existence that even nuclear weapons could not destroy appeared, Wu Lian would have to pay more than 100 times the price if they wanted to restrain these people. Using thunderous means to show the kindness of a bodhisattva. The Wu Lian was a powerful weapon of the country, not a dictatorial force. Since they could obtain all kinds of benefits out of thin air if they joined, even the most noble cultivator would think twice before refusing. Moreover, even a 1,000-year-old turtle like Jianghu was willing to join. In fact, it already showed that joining the Wu Lian was definitely a very wise decision. Therefore, after the first 5-year plan was proposed, Wu Lian successfully gathered most of the cultivation legacies in Wuxia. The plan went smoothly. In fact, as long as the first 5-year plan was successfully achieved, Wu Lian would consider opening the cultivation legacies to the public and take the initiative to take responsibility for promoting the development of the cultivation world. But it was a pity. Not everyone could think from the perspective of the country. Therefore, no matter how good Wu Lian's plan was, it could not win everyone's approval. When the forest was big, there were naturally all kinds of birds. Perhaps these cultivators did not recognize their national identity from the beginning to the end. Although they were born and raised in Wuxia, they did not have the concept of a country in their hearts, so they could not understand the Wu Lian's actions. In ancient times, there was no Wu Lian, but everyone cultivated well. How come after the Wu Lian, ordinary people could not cultivate? Therefore, in the second year of the spiritual qi recovery, pioneers like Yu Jingzi, who had great ambitions and cared about the common people, stepped forward one after another. They believed that cultivation should be free and unrestrained, so they could not accept the Wu Lian's unified management model. What kind of bull-shastrisk tea country was this? Cultivation was one's own business. What did it have to do with the country? Since the Wu Lian wanted to suppress the cultivation legacies and prevent ordinary people from cultivating, these pioneers should bravely step forward and spread the cultivation fire seed for the world. A single spark could also start a prairie fire. Yu Jingzi was not the first, and presumably would not be the last. But unlike other people who secretly preached, Yu Jingzi's thoughts were more extreme, and his style of doing things was more daring. How developed was the internet these days? As long as there was a farce, it would spread throughout the country almost instantly. Preaching under Tiananmen Square. Today's incident was so big that even the Wu Lian could not block and delete the related videos and audio immediately. Of course, after ordinary people saw it, they might just chuckle, click like, and then scroll down to watch another video. This was what most people did, but it was definitely not what everyone did. As long as 1 in 1,000 people was willing to carefully study what Yu Jingzi was talking about, then he would definitely be able to benefit from it. Since the fire seed had been thrown, the next step was to see when it could start a prairie fire. The world is going to change. In the courtyard, Xianxia silently sighed. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he quickly got up and took out a laptop from his room. Don't forget, long before becoming an immortal cultivator, Xianxia was also a diligent programmer, and the kind with excellent professional skills. Yo, it's been deleted so quickly? Xianxia took the laptop and did a simple search. He found that the news about today's farce had been mostly deleted by the Wu Lian, leaving only some 404 pages that had not been updated in time. Therefore, he decisively used his specialty. After a series of fierce operations, he opened a slightly strange website on the laptop. Yu Jingzi. Oh, it's here. The update of the information is quite timely. So this is the limit of this cultivation technique. Then what should I do after I reach foundation establishment? This kind of trash can be sold for 5 million. Are you kidding me? Kavenka cried. I'm so sorry, I really don't want to stop updating. Chapter 532. The web page Xianxia was browsing at this moment was not a web page that could be accessed by ordinary people. This was the legendary dark web. Since Wu Lian had blocked related events, Xianxia wanted to go to the dark web to see if there was any top-secret information that was not known to the public. Of course, he had to enjoy it to his heart's content. The result was just as Xianxia expected. Since the beginning of the recovery of spirit qi, countries around the world had taken corresponding actions. It was just that when it came to the management of the cultivation world, the control that capitalist countries had was far less than a socialist country like Wuxia. Therefore, many Western countries, especially traditional countries with a long history like England and France, had already established many large-scale cultivation organizations. Cultivation also meant extraordinary ability. For anyone, it was simply an irresistible temptation. As a result, in these short 2 years, the foreign cultivator organizations developed like a virus. Among them, the Knights Templar and the Wizard Association were the most famous. The website Xianxia was browsing at this moment, Solomon, was the world's largest dark web built and operated by the Knights Templar. In addition to conventional firearms and opium transactions, one could also buy all kinds of unconventional goods, such as beautiful women, slaves, human heads, and even military aircraft, tanks, and cannons that could not be obtained through conventional channels could all be bought here. Of course, the premise was that one had enough money. In addition to these things, the most eye-catching one was naturally the cultivation method. This was also a special product that had only appeared in the past 2 years. Perhaps Yu Jingzi had lost his mind after secluding himself in the mountains and did not know how to use modern technology flexibly. Therefore, when he had just finished teaching under Tiananmen City, the dark web had already listed the cultivation methods he had imparted. 5 million per copy. Unlimited. In other words, as long as one person chose to pay, the Knights Templar could pick up 5 million for free. If 1,000 people bought, the Knights Templar could pick up 5 billion for free. What kind of concept was this? It was no wonder that Xianxia was surprised. After all, cultivation methods were written on paper, and how much did a piece of paper cost? Although his foundation cultivation pill was also very expensive, he still spent some money on it. Xianxia not only had to purchase the raw materials, but he also had to process them himself. Thinking about it this way, it seemed that selling cultivation techniques was more cost-effective. The dark web was not taobao. Naturally, there was no detailed sales data on it. Therefore, Xianxia did not know how many copies of this cultivation method had been sold. However, Xianxia speculated that this set of cultivation method should not be able to sell many copies. Because it was incomplete, if he cultivated according to this cultivation method, he could only reach the peak of the qi refining stage at most. He was still thousands of miles away from the foundation establishment stage. However, what Xianxia did not expect was, up until now, the number of people who had bought this cultivation method had far exceeded the range he could imagine. Xianxia underestimated the attractiveness of cultivation methods to ordinary people. At the same time, he also underestimated the desire of foreigners for the inheritance of Wuxia. If it were not for the Wu Lian holding the fort outside, almost turning Wuxia into an iron bucket, there would have been assassins rushing into Wuxia with large-caliber sniper rifles to search for the ancient inheritance in the famous mountains and rivers. In this world, there were too few ancient inheritances as strong as Daiyu Island. More of them were individual cultivators like Yu Jingzi. Was the foundation establishment stage weak? That was equivalent to Xianxia's point of view. For ordinary people, the foundation establishment stage was second only to the celestial beings. Even according to Wu Lian's strength evaluation standards, the foundation establishment stage was at least an A-level expert. What did this mean? A mere incomplete cultivation method could make an ordinary person become an A-level expert. Now, it was only selling for 5 million. Was it too expensive? Of course it was not. Therefore, when the farce of Yu Jingzi preaching in front of Tiananmen Square broke out, the whole world was in an uproar. It had to be said that the Wu Lian had really put in a lot of effort to maintain the security of Wuxia. No wonder there had been less and less news coming from abroad in recent years. It turned out that the Wu Lian had blocked all of it in advance. Even so, if the situation continued to develop at this rate, it wouldn't be long before Wuxia would once again bring out the policy of seclusion until the Wu Alliance completed the first 5-year plan. Other than trading, the most practical function of the dark web was intelligence and information exchange. This was the world's largest cultivator forum and also the world's largest news website. Xianxia browsed through the news channel and found that it was all about cultivators. For example, a knight commander of the Knights Templar had a fight with a Brahmin boss some time ago. Or, a high-ranking member of Yinyang Liao had a fight with a white-robed wizard of the Sorcerers Association. If the two sides fought in public, the website would even list the actual combat videos. This is interesting. I wonder if my name is on it? Let's search. Xianxia seemed to have opened the door to a new world. He did not do anything for the whole day. He just sat in the courtyard with his computer and browsed the website while drinking tea. Unlike official websites, searching for content on the dark web cost money. It cost a few hundred yuan each time. Therefore, Xianxia spent a lot of effort and finally got past the surveillance of the Wuxia Internet Police and successfully tied his bank card to the dark web. As the notifications of successful purchases kept ringing, Xianxia found several pieces of information about him in a short while. Oh, there's really something? Mr. Chen, real name unknown, age unknown, from Wuxia, strength evaluation X, third on the heaven leaderboard. Main experience. Defeated the leader of the Dark Ghost sect, Su Feng, at the peak of Taihang Mountain in Wuxia. Compared to Xianxia's other achievements, the battle with Su Feng at Taihang Mountain was too eye-catching. Therefore, it was not surprising that it was recorded by the dark web. Other than that, Xianxia also found several pieces of information about himself. However, the sources of these pieces of information did not seem to be reliable. Therefore, the dark web labeled them as unconfirmed. Third on the heaven leaderboard? Xianxia noticed this so-called ranking. Therefore, he tried to click on the two words, heaven leaderboard. He did not expect a window to pop up on the web page. I have to pay for this? They must be crazy poor. After silently ridiculing him, Xianxia obediently handed over the money. Then, he saw a detailed list made by the Knights Templar after a few rounds of review. Chapter 533. Just like the status of the Forbes list in people's hearts, this strength list created by the Knights Templar had been unanimously recognized by almost all cultivators in the world since the moment it was released. Therefore, this list was also known as the Heaven List. The list recorded almost all the cultivators who had shown their prowess in various parts of the world. As long as a cultivator had fought in public, the Knights Templar would use this cultivator's battle record and cultivation base, as well as the evaluation of some more authoritative organizations such as the Wu Lian and Yinyang Liao. Finally, this cultivator would be listed on the Heaven List in order of strength. Just like the Forbes list, the Heaven List only had 500 names. Therefore, being listed on the Heaven List was the highest honor in the hearts of almost all cultivators. Xianxia was also on the list, and he was ranked in the top 3. Unlike the free information he had seen before, the information Xianxia saw after he paid for it was more complete. Almost every name was followed by a few hundred or even a few thousand words of detailed information. Mr. Chen, real name unknown, age unknown, from Wuxia, strength evaluation X, ranked 3rd on the Heaven List. In addition to this free information, the notes column attached to the Heaven List actually clearly recorded the reason why Xianxia was able to sit in the top 3. Apart from the battle with Su Feng, Mr. Chen has not fought with anyone in public, so there is no way to know his specific cultivation base. According to reliable information obtained from within the Wu Lian, Mr. Chen should be recognized as the strongest person within the Wu Lian. There are even rumors that say that even Lin Tingfeng, who is currently ranked 1st on the Heaven List, does not seem to have the confidence to beat Mr. Chen. Therefore, the Knights Templar combined all the information they currently have and made an exception to list Mr. Chen as the 3rd on the Heaven List. If there are any objections, you can go to Wuxia to find Mr. Chen and fight him. The Knights Templar are willing to follow you all the way and take the initiative to be the witnesses. Seeing this, Xianxia could not help but shake his head and laugh. Why did they make it the same as by Shaoxing's Jianghu weapon manual? If they did this, wouldn't that be encouraging the cultivators to fight crazily for a false reputation? Xianxia didn't really care about his ranking. After he roughly browsed through the list, he found that this list wasn't very reliable. It was even a little too one-sided. Perhaps it was because the Wu Lian had blocked all relevant information, so even though Dai Yu Island had joined the Wu Lian, there was no one with the surname Jiang on the Heaven roll. If the Heaven leaderboard was really as authoritative as imagined, how could there not be anyone with the surname Jiang on it? Even if Xianxia was not included, Jiang Yan should still be number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard. How could an ordinary person compare to an old tortoise that had lived for over 1,000 years? Thus, it was fine to just take a look at this list, but one must not take it seriously. Lin Tingfeng? 1st on the Heaven leaderboard? Although Xianxia didn't really care about this list, he still subconsciously clicked on the detailed introduction of the number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard. It was just like how everyone knew that the world's highest peak was Mount Everest, but very few people knew that the world's second highest peak was Chogori Peak. This was human nature, and Xianxia was no exception. Therefore, the number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard was really quite eye-catching. As the current number 1 on the Heaven leaderboard, Lin Tingfeng was not only one of the founders of the Wu Lian, but also one of the 3 divine pillars of Wuxia. The so-called 3 divine pillars were actually the 3 giants of the Wu Lian. One had to know that long before Xianxia returned to Earth, the 3 divine pillars were already famous all over the world. If the 3 divine pillars could forcefully cultivate to the heavenly man level when spirit qi was exhausted, one could imagine how outstanding their talents were. Now that spirit qi had begun to recover, there might not be many changes in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the most outstanding among them would naturally be able to stand out from the vast masses. At this point, it was necessary to mention a classic biological term, which was catch-up growth. At the same time, it was also known as compensatory growth. If Xianxia guessed correctly, Earth should be in the catch-up stage now. After all, how powerful was Earth in ancient times? Because of the exhaustion of spirit qi, Earth had completely become what people called the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, once spirit qi on Earth began to recover, it would inevitably lead to an almost abnormal increase in the strength of cultivators. At present, the powerhouses on the Heaven leaderboard were mainly concentrated in the Heavenly Man level, which was the level above the Foundation Establishment level and below the Golden Core level. If things continue to develop according to the current momentum, within 10 years, there should be someone who could take the lead in breaking through the golden core level and officially step into the Yuanying stage. Yuanying? What kind of concept was that? At that time, the Earth should also show a different appearance, right? Xianxia stood from the perspective of a bystander and roughly deduced the changes of Earth's future. Then, he suddenly thought of a very serious problem. 10 years later, Earth would no longer be the stage for him, the great Supreme Chen. It would be Nianyan's turn to shine. At the age of 17 or 18, wasn't it the best time for Nianyan to be in her prime and full of vigor? When he thought that Nianyan might face a new golden age in the future, Xianxia couldn't help but feel happy for his daughter from the bottom of his heart. At least, she didn't have to be like her father, who had to wander around for most of his life and go through untold hardships before finally finding the goal that he had been pursuing all his life. Wasn't that right? People often said that after having children, they would understand how difficult it was to be a parent. Family was always an endless topic, but parents were still the ones who contributed the most and received the least in return. Flowers could bloom again, but there was no youth in life. In the blink of an eye, time passed quickly. 2 years quietly slipped away just like that. Nianyan was 9 years old. During this time, she skipped another grade, from the 4th grade to the 5th grade. Therefore, not long after her 9th birthday, Nianyan officially ushered in her last summer vacation in elementary school. When school started again next time, she would be a 6th grade student. Did time pass quickly? No, not at all. Because after having children, we will find that time becomes worthless at all. After sending the child to school in the morning, in the blink of an eye, we have to wait patiently at the school gate for the child to finish school. Every day, we have to care about the child's food and clothing, as well as the child's mental health. In addition to accompanying the child to eat, play, and chat, we have to constantly urge the child to study hard. Just like the lyrics of the song, "The magic of love spins in circles, thinking of you makes my heart bloom, night and day." It was just that the song here was not about love, but about family. From the moment the child was born, the child officially became the axis of the entire family, so parents had to revolve around the child every day. Early in the morning, after Nianyan had breakfast, she imitated Chen Shi and brought out a rocking chair from the house. Then, the father and daughter each held a large fan and lay in the chair leisurely fanning themselves. "Dad," you said, "this time if I get first place in the grade again, you will take me to ride a horse." "When are we going?" Nianyan leaned on the chair and poked Chen Shi with the fan. After that, a look of anticipation appeared on her face. Sure enough, Dad would never let her down, just as she would not let Dad down. "Okay, when do you want to go? I think the weather today is pretty good. How about today? But you have to go back to the room and change your clothes. Don't wear a skirt. It's inconvenient." Hearing this, Nianyan's eyes suddenly lit up. She quickly jumped off the chair excitedly, then grabbed Chen Shi's hand and tried to pull him up from the chair. "Dad is so nice." Chapter 534. Presumably, every parent knew that their children changed their clothes very quickly. Although Nianyan had not yet entered puberty, her height was still steadily increasing at a rate of 5 centimeters per year. Just after her 9th birthday, Nianyan's height had already reached 135 centimeters, so even if she skipped 2 grades, she was not considered too short in the 6th grade. Her height was growing very quickly, so naturally, she was wearing more and more clothes. Little brat. No, she should be called a little brat now. Perhaps she inherited her mother's aesthetic preference, so Nianyan was now more and more fond of wearing plain colors and simpler styles. Those colorful princess dresses had actually disappeared from her wardrobe for a long time. Qin Ruoying's face shape leaned towards an oval face. Since Nianyan inherited all of her mother's advantages, now that she was 9 years old, her face naturally lost some of the baby fat that was unique to children. Instead, she had a trace of a young girl's bright appearance. She was wearing a pure white dress with a simple ponytail on her head, coupled with her big bright eyes and the smile that was always on her face. If she put on some light makeup, she could simply be a Taobao children's clothing model. Hello, children's clothing model? But then again, it didn't seem like a good thing for a girl to be too beautiful. For example, Qianxi's mood was very complicated now. From the perspective of a father, Qianxi naturally hoped that his daughter was as beautiful as possible. But when his daughter really grew up, There would be passers-by who couldn't help but pick up their phones to secretly take pictures every day. Xianxia's mood became heavier and heavier. The cabbage at home was becoming more and more beautiful. What should he do in the future? In a blink of an eye, he was surrounded by little pigs waiting to be fed. He almost wanted to rush into his vegetable garden and eat this cabbage on the spot. Nian was only 9 years old. How could a 9-year-old child not look good? Don't you know that a girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood? He didn't even let go of such a young child. What a beast. When Nian really entered puberty and the secondary sexual characteristics appeared, Xianxia's worries would be a few hundred times greater than now. Compared to when she was 7 years old, Nian's mind was becoming more active, and her ability to express herself was also becoming stronger. Therefore, she was now speaking one sentence after another. She truly had the temperament of a leader. In school, she was the class monitor, a good student, and also the leader of the young pioneers. Different from many of the children of officials, these honors were fought for by her own performance, so not only was Nian famous in class, but she was also somewhat famous in school. If it wasn't for her young age, some precocious child would have made her the school belle. She was already a combination of wisdom and beauty, and if she added her omnipotent father into the mix, with such excellent conditions, it was unknown if there was anyone in this world who was worthy of her. So don't look at how She was worried that his daughter was too popular. Maybe in another 20 years, he, as a father, would have to personally travel thousands of miles in the divine continent just to find a good partner for his daughter. Today's entertainment was horse riding. It wasn't the kind of wild horses that galloped recklessly on the prairie, but professional horse racing in the International Equestrian School. So after she let Nian go back to the room to change her clothes, the father and daughter were ready to set off. Here was something that needed to be mentioned. After 2 years of hard work, Qin Ruoying's cultivation had finally reached the peak of the celestial being realm. Currently, she was at the stage where she could break through at any time. So during this period of time, Qin Ruoying didn't attend the family gatherings. Instead, like Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongwang, she shut herself in her room all day long. This was the daily life of a cultivator. Other than cultivation, there was only cultivation. Unless she reached Xi's realm, she still had a long way to go before she could go into seclusion. Nian seemed to have gotten used to Qin Ruoying's recent seclusion. So, after shouting from outside the door, she skipped to Xi's side. Then, she held onto Xi's arm and directly walked out of the courtyard. Dad, didn't you buy 4 lessons for me last time? I still have 2 lessons to attend. How about we come back later today and attend the remaining 2 lessons together? Okay, then we can only eat outside today. Later on, you can't be picky about your food. As he spoke, She smiled and pinched her face. This child's mouth had already been spoiled by him. Now, she basically didn't eat outside food, so he had to give her a heads up in advance. Okay, I'm not picky about my food. Perhaps it was because she had ridden a big cat when she was young. Ever since she took her to the racetrack, this little girl was completely infatuated with riding horses. Unfortunately, the land in Shangjing was too expensive. It was impossible to open a racetrack in the core city. So no matter how much she liked it, she couldn't take her to ride horses every day. The father and daughter chatted and laughed as they walked out of the gate of drooping flowers in large strides. But at this moment, all of a sudden, a strong demonic wind blew in the courtyard. It was clearly a bright and sunny morning, but the demonic wind in the courtyard was blowing so loudly that Nian couldn't open her eyes. Dad, is it going to rain? The little girl seemed to be frightened by the sudden demonic wind. So, she hurriedly burrowed into Xi's arms. Seeing this, Shi thoughtfully looked back at the courtyard. Then, he raised his left hand and lightly waved it. Following his wave, the heaven and earth suddenly quieted down. The wind stopped. Everything returned to normal. Nian, wait for me here. It might rain. I'll go back and get an umbrella. Okay. Nian didn't suspect anything. After nodding her head honestly, she obediently stood under the eaves and waited for Shi to go get an umbrella. Shi smiled and patted her head. Then, he turned and walked into the courtyard. Then, a familiar figure appeared in front of Shi again. Oh, you broke through? Congratulations. Like Qin Ruoying, Qin Xueqing had been in seclusion during this time. Her sister-in-law's talent was excellent. In addition, She had a certain foundation in martial arts. So, in just a few years, she completed the transformation from foundation establishment to golden core. The demonic wind just now was a fluctuation of vital energy that she accidentally set off when she came out of seclusion. After not seeing her for 2 years, her sister-in-law was still elegant. So when she saw Chen Shi, the smile on her face suddenly turned cold. It's been 2 years. You lied to me in seclusion just to delay for 2 more years? Chapter 535. The atmosphere in the courtyard was a little awkward. In the face of Qin Xueqing's sudden accusation, Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. Then, he pretended to be surprised and asked, "What did I lie to you about?" After hearing Chen Shi's self-righteous question, Qin Xueqing became even angrier. She frowned and opened her mouth slightly as if she wanted to say something, but Chen Shi didn't give her the chance. Before she could open her mouth again, Chen Shi's side was like a string of cannons. Her mouth kept rattling. "Say, we are relatives now. Can you not measure the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain? Didn't you practice the great wilderness physical exercise technique well? Why don't you recognize me now? Look at you now. Ice skin, jade bones and jade body are at the initial stage. You can block the attack of an ordinary Dharma treasure with just your physical body. What else are you not satisfied with? If you're still not satisfied, you can continue to practice. When you practice this technique to the highest level, you might be able to shatter the void with your physical body and step into the void realm in a whole new way." Looking at Chen Shi's serious expression, those who didn't know would think that Qin Xueqing really took advantage of him. In fact, wasn't this cultivation method the same one he had given to the big cat before? What needed to be mentioned here was, whether it was Tianshu, Tianxian, or Taiwei enclosure, the cultivation system in these places was mainly qi refinement. It was the most orthodox cultivation system known to immortal cultivators, which was the immortal cultivation method. However, with Chen Shi's current experience, although the orthodox cultivation system was complete and strong, it didn't mean that other cultivation systems were necessarily weak. They were even regarded as wrong paths by others. For example, the martial arts that Qin Xueqing was learning now, or the magic and witchcraft on Earth, or even the deformed children that evolved from necromancers like the Onmyoji. The end of the qi refinement method was the immortal emperor. Then, what was the end of the body refinement method? The reason why people couldn't see the end was because they hadn't found the path to the end. Cultivation methods were dead, but people were alive. The universe was vast and boundless. Who could be sure that the other cultivation holy lands would focus on qi refinement? Therefore, in the end, it was still the same old saying, the great Tao flowed like mercury, and every grain was round. Therefore, Chen Shi never asked about his sister-in-law's cultivation method. Since she liked to practice like this, then he would let her practice on her own. As her brother-in-law, the most he could do was give her some help from the side. For example, he could provide her with the Great Desolation body tempering technique and use it as inspiration. Perhaps it was because the big cat was a monster, so even after cultivating for so long, it was still stuck at the initial stage. On the other hand, after Qin Xueqing obtained the Great Desolation body forging technique, she was able to completely complete the first stage of transformation within a short span of 2 years. From then on, she became a true body cultivator. The Great Desolation body forging technique was found by Chen Shi in the Sky Yen Divine Sex Library. This was an incomplete body tempering technique, so Chen Shi didn't want to give this technique to Qin Xueqing. The reason why he changed his mind and took the initiative to pass this technique to Qin Xueqing was mainly because Chenghua and Yi, these 2 brats didn't keep their promises. They used their mother's birthday as an excuse to gain sympathy. They said that they would be back in 7 days, but in the end, it had been 2 years. They hadn't returned for 2 whole years. Great Sovereign Chen didn't even have enough time to make his children happy, so how could he really run to the Supreme Palace enclosure to catch them? As the saying goes, revenge is a dish best served cold. Chen Shi wasn't anxious at all, but his sister-in-law couldn't sit still anymore. They said that it would be 7 days, but it was delayed again and again. 1 month wasn't enough, so they waited for another 2 months. 2 months had passed, but Chenghua and Yi still didn't show any signs of showing up. His sister-in-law couldn't wait any longer, so she kept saying that she wanted to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure, and that she had to personally catch those 2 brats. How could Chen Shi agree to her going to the Supreme Palace enclosure when he saw her being so impatient? What if she was captured by the Shenyuan family or Jade Clear Paradise before they were caught? At that time, wouldn't great sovereign Chen have to personally make a trip? Xianxia obviously wouldn't do this kind of loss-making business. So he used the Great Desolation body forging technique as bait, and after some careful guidance, he successfully lured his sister-in-law into a death seclusion. This time, his ears were finally clear. Xianxia originally planned to wait until Nian came of age, then bring his family to the Supreme Palace enclosure for a tour, and then catch those two brats. Who would have thought that Qin Shueqing's talent was actually so outstanding? In a short 2 years' time, she had successfully mastered the Great Desolation body forging technique. Although it was only the first stage, but to Qin Shueqing, this was a brand new beginning. Now that Qin Shueqing had come out of seclusion, it actually meant that Xianxia must give her a satisfactory explanation today. Either he went, or she went. Anyway, one of them had to go. This was his sister-in-law's character. If there's something to say, say it. If there's nothing to say, don't find trouble. Since Chenghua and Yiji said that they would come back, then they must come back. Qin Shueqing could forgive their previous mistakes, but she absolutely couldn't tolerate being played and fooled like this. Hence, no matter what Xianxia said now, his sister-in-law only looked at him coldly. Xianxia was stunned by her stare, and in the end, he really didn't know what to say, so he spread his hands and asked helplessly, "Say it, what exactly do you want?" "Lend me a Xianxia. I'll go by myself." His sister-in-law was rather straightforward. She didn't want to listen to Xianxia's excuses anymore, and didn't want to waste any more time, so the best way was for her to personally make a trip to the Supreme Palace enclosure. Xianxia had long expected that she would say this. Hence, after seriously sizing up Qin Shueqing, he kept the smile on his face, and asked seriously, "Have you thought it through? That place isn't Earth. Once you meet with any danger, even I won't be able to rush over to save you immediately." Not sure if it was because Xianxia had long regarded Qin Shueqing as his family, so he really didn't want Qin Shueqing to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure alone. It was a very strange feeling. Just like when Nian suddenly said that she wanted to go out to play alone, how could Xianxia, as her father, be at ease? But what could he do even if he was worried? How could Xianxia not know his sister-in-law's character? "I've thought it through. This trip is not only to seek revenge, but also to go out and travel. Although I'm not as strong as you, I'm not a lamb to be slaughtered by others. It's fine if I didn't know about the Supreme Palace enclosure before, but now that I know, how can I continue to live under this blue sky? The universe is so big, I also want to see it." Speaking of this, Qin Shueqing suddenly paused, and then looked up at the blue sky above her head with a yearning expression. It was still that beautiful blue sky and white clouds, but her line of sight seemed to have penetrated the clouds, crossed the boundless void, and reached the other end of the universe. That's right. With her strong character, how could she not yearn for the colorful depths of the universe? And this was obviously her sister-in-law's true thoughts deep in her heart. "Don't worry, I know you're doing this for my own good." Chapter 536. I know you are doing this for my own good. Maybe it was the reluctance to part, so Qin Shueqing's face showed a gentle and sweet smile for the first time. She stood in the middle of the yard, but Yingying's smile gave people a warm feeling like the winter snow had melted and spring had returned. Seeing this, Xianxia couldn't help but show an expression like he had seen a ghost. After Qin Shueqing saw his expression, she seemed to suddenly think of something, and a blush suddenly flew on her face. "I didn't expect this." The sister-in-law who had always considered herself a tigress actually showed such a shy little girl's attitude in private. Looking at her shy and charming face, people who didn't know would probably think that she had mistakenly eaten some kind of indescribable medicine. With Xianxia's understanding of Qin Shueqing, if the atmosphere continued to be awkward at this time, this girl might turn hostile on the spot. Therefore, Xianxia didn't say anything more. After a light cough, he took out something from his arms and handed it to Qin Shueqing. This was Chenghua's Sumeru mustard seed bag, but it was already his. In addition to a Xianxia that was improved by Xianxia, there were also the spirit stones left by Yiji, as well as some defensive magic weapons and medicinal materials. For Xianxia, these things were not valuable at all, and they were not even as practical as yuan. But for Qin Shueqing, these things were like the novice equipment that came with the system, and they were also necessary for her to enter the martial arts world. "The imprint of these things has been erased by me. As long as you drip a drop of blood on them, you can use them freely. The journey to the Supreme Palace enclosure is long. Once you encounter any danger, even I can't come to save you immediately, so you have to remember that you must be careful on this trip. When I went to the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, I'd made a few friends there. If you really encounter any danger, then it's best that you don't try to be brave and directly report my name. Perhaps you'll be able to scare them. By the way, aren't the first and second on the Heaven Leaderboard members from Wulian? Why don't you bring them with you? Isn't it better to have more people to take care of one another? Xianxia was like a parent who was about to send his child off to a faraway journey. After Qin Wanqing heard this, she didn't interrupt him coldly. Instead, she stood silently to the side and listened carefully to every word Xianxia said. I have a jade pendant here. Take it as well. Remember to wear it on your body. This thing was originally prepared for Nian, but she can't use it for the time being. Since you're going so far away, I'll give it to you to protect yourself first. But you must remember, this jade pendant can only be used 3 times. After 3 times, it will completely lose its effect. So when you encounter danger, you must escape as soon as possible. As he spoke, Xianxia took out a unique jade pendant from his bosom. It was no wonder that Xianxia was so long-winded today. After all, he knew Qin Shueqing's character too well. If he didn't repeatedly emphasize in advance, with her previous behavior, she definitely wouldn't care whether the person standing opposite her was a celestial venerable or a supreme venerable. In short, she would just bite the bullet and do it. It had to be said that for this stubborn sister-in-law of his, Xianxi's, stubbornness really broke his heart. In the end, Qin Shueqing still left. Other than Xianxia, no one knew that she flew into outer space alone just like that. Nian didn't know what her father and aunt were talking about in the courtyard. She was focused on the racecourse, so when Xianxia finally crossed the Chuehua gate with an umbrella, the little girl hurriedly pulled Xianxia and was about to leave. After being delayed by Qin Shueqing, it was already 10 o'clock in the morning. The racecourse was outside the 4th Ring Road. Even if there was no traffic, it would take nearly an hour to run. So Xianxia didn't take the bus with Nian. Instead, he took out his phone and called for a Didi taxi. The father and daughter stood by the roadside, bored to death, waiting for a taxi. At this time, a girl with a lot of flyers in her hand suddenly came to them. Hello sir, your daughter is so cute. I wonder if you have signed her up for a martial arts training class? Hearing this, Xianxia turned his head and looked at the girl. She was about 18 or 19 years old. She should be a part-time college student. Sorry, she's not interested in these. Xianxia politely refused. However, the girl saw that Nian didn't participate in any martial arts training class, so she mustered up the courage and continued to introduce to Xianxia. Sir, it's like this. Our martial arts training class has just opened and is currently holding a membership top-up event. Your daughter should still be in elementary school, right? Her age is a good time to learn martial arts. Do you want to know more about it? Our martial arts training class has a strong teaching staff. The head coach has won a national competition. If you send your daughter to our class, she will definitely become a qualified martial artist in the future. Sorry, we're really not interested. Oh, okay, sorry to bother you. The girl left with a disappointed face. From beginning to end, Nian didn't say a word because she was already used to it. Just like the popular swimming and fitness 2 years ago, for some reason, there was a sudden martial arts craze in the country in the past 2 years. With the slogan of strengthening the body and retaining one's youth, this martial arts craze was extremely fierce. Whether it was a small city or a big city like Shangjing, there was a martial arts training class near every residential area. The low-end ones were called martial arts training classes, and the high-end ones were called martial arts halls. The number was almost comparable to internet cafes. Speaking of this, I have to first mention a past event that people born in the 90s and the aughts might not know much about. In the 1980s, there was a Qigong craze in the country. From military commanders, national defense experts, and academicians of the Chinese Academy of Sciences to ignorant old people and young children, almost everyone was learning Qigong and believed in it without a doubt. Speaking of which, this wasn't a shameful thing. Because when Qigong was popular in Wuxia, the theory of telepathy was also popular in Western countries. At that time, there was no 4G network, and there were no Weibo videos. Therefore, only people who experienced it personally knew how exaggerated the Qigong craze was. In the blink of an eye, 40 years had passed. Society was constantly developing, and humans were constantly improving. Looking back, some people might think that people in the past were too stupid and ignorant. How could they believe in something as unreliable as Qigong? If people had such doubts, it meant that they didn't know. The eye exercise was actually a product of the Qigong craze, and it had been passed down to this day. And the original name of this famous set of eye health exercises was Clear Eye Qigong Exercise. Chapter 537. The return of immortal cultivation as a stay-at-home dad was delayed by something today. Please wait for a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 538. Throughout human history, whenever a particular trend arose at a particular time, this trend would inevitably sweep across the entire country in a very short period of time. Therefore, under the influence of the Wu Lian in secret, coupled with the support of the mainstream media, Wuxia immediately set off a huge wave of martial arts practice. Under the banner of strengthening the body, retaining youth, and lightening the body, countless martial arts training classes sprung up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain and gradually replaced the extremely popular gyms from 2 years ago. Martial arts and dancing were different. It not only had the effect of exercising the body, but also had the effect of self-defense. Therefore, as soon as the martial arts trend arose, many delicate little girls took the lead and became the main students in the martial arts halls. Moreover, unlike the Qigong craze 40 years ago, the Wu Lian brought out something really useful this time. What needed to be understood here was, martial arts had training methods and fighting methods. Training methods were often said to be flowery and impractical, but fighting methods were the real application of actual combat. The Arhut fist that was widely circulated in society today was no longer a training method, but a real fighting method. Therefore, after ordinary people learned it, they could also fight to a certain extent. It was very obvious that this Arhut fist came from the Wu Lian. As the public's recognition of martial arts increased, the Wu Lian once again stepped out from behind the scenes and became the Chinese Martial Arts Research Association that people now saw. Internally, the Wu Lian worked together with various levels of government to promote martial arts throughout the country. Externally, Wuxia's officials also specially introduced a trial law regarding martial artists, the Provisional Regulations of the Chinese Martial Arts Management Association. In the provisional regulations, fighting was still illegal, but if it was in a formal martial arts hall registered with the Industry and Commerce Bureau, it would be regarded as a legitimate martial arts competition. As long as it did not result in death or disability, it was not illegal. What kind of exaggerated promotion was this? It was almost equivalent to the chairman personally promoting martial arts. Therefore, after the trial law was released, countless speculators heard the news and moved in. In a short period of time, regardless of whether there were real martial artists in charge, martial arts training classes of all sizes vied to open and settle down, looking as if they would reproduce Yuan style. These days, children would always be led by their parents into various interest training classes. In terms of interests and hobbies, the little girl didn't seem to inherit Qin Ruoying's quiet elegance. Instead, she inherited Qin Xueqing's liveliness and energy. After Chen, she took her to experience riding a horse. The little girl was completely infatuated with horsemanship. As a standard in Western aristocratic schools, equestrian skills might be slightly different from what ordinary people imagined. It was the only event in the Olympic Games where men and women competed on the same field. So many children from rich families abroad began to learn horsemanship when they were young. Just like a European proverb says, those who can ride horses are not necessarily nobles, but nobles certainly can ride horses. As more and more Wuxia people went to study in British aristocratic schools, this trend naturally spread to Wuxia as well. Nobles, of course, had to be particular. A helmet, gloves, riding boots, breeches, charbus, and a protective vest were all indispensable. It was as if without it, it could no longer be called an international equestrian skill, but a traditional equestrian sport in Wuxia. Therefore, when Nian just signed up, the staff of the equestrian club persuaded her to buy a set of equipment. Although she was not very interested in these things, because Nian wanted to learn, he paid the money quickly and bought 16 classes at one time. Since this thing was called an aristocratic sport, the charging standard naturally had to be according to the aristocratic standard. A 45-minute class cost 800 yuan, and the coach had to charge extra. But even so, when she came to the club with Nian, the race course was still crowded with children practicing. Although many of the children were just individual customers who bought in a group, but it should be known that children also had vanity. Therefore, after experiencing such high-end extracurricular training like horsemanship once, these children would usually be like Nian, clamoring for their parents to pay for the class. If the child liked it, then buy it. Although it was a little painful, it was not unbearable. In fact, the reason why many parents agreed to let their children learn horsemanship was that they actually had their own calculations in mind. Children from ordinary families certainly had no way to come into contact with children from rich families. In order to let their children come into contact with a higher social circle, the equestrian club was obviously a very good platform. After all, whether a family was rich or not, one only needed to look at the children's clothes to know. Children from ordinary families would definitely only wear the free clothes provided by the club. Only the truly wealthy families would buy their own equestrian outfits for their children. Nian's appearance was already outstanding, so when she changed into her equestrian clothes and came to the lounge to wait for the staff to arrange the horse, several parents could not help but whisper to each other. Children were not so calculative. As long as their children could have a good relationship with Nian, they, as parents, would naturally be able to talk to Xianxia. Judging from her appearance, Xianxia didn't look very old, and her dressing was very low-key. But where was this place? It was one of the best equestrian clubs in Shangjing. Therefore, the more low-key people like Xianxia acted, the more complicated their background was. As long as they could get in touch with Xianxia, they might be able to get some unexpected benefits from it. For example, they could take this opportunity to become Xianxia's agent and help Xianxia deal with some trivial matters that he could not personally deal with. Or they could get some project approval from Xianxia that ordinary people could not get at all. In short, in the imagination of these parents, Xianxia had already become a powerful young master in Shangjing, and the kind that could get a red-head approval. Therefore, after a simple discussion, several parents from ordinary backgrounds told their children that they must find a chance to get close to Nian later, and it would be best if they could directly become friends with her. As for how to build a social network and get to know and climb up to powerful people, there was no need to go into detail here. Xianxia heard the conversation of these parents, but he did not care at all. A misunderstanding was a misunderstanding. Since someone wanted to make Nian happy for him, Great Supreme Chen could only raise his hands to express his welcome. As long as Nian was happy, he, as a father, did not mind playing the role of a powerful young master. In the lounge, Xianxia was not so rich that he had to buy Nian an exclusive horse, so the father and daughter could only wait for the club to arrange a horse. Nian was an official member. Therefore, according to the usual practice, as long as Xianxia communicated with the club in advance, then the club should prepare a horse before they arrived. Today, for some reason, the father and daughter sat in the lounge and waited for a full 20 minutes before the club staff hurriedly came to inform Nian that she could get on the horse. The horse today seemed to be of good pedigree. It was white all over and had a beautiful figure, without a trace of impurity. Nian liked it very much at first sight, so she did not care whether she had ridden this horse before or not. Under the guidance of the coach, she rode the horse quickly for a few laps. Nian seemed to be very talented in riding. After this period of training, she could even do obstacle training. Father, look at me. Am I awesome? After running a lap, the little girl sat on the back of the horse and laughed complacently. Her small body gave people a feeling of valiance and formidableness. For a moment, there was a bit of a left leading the yellow, right leading the blue, brocade hat and marten fur coat. Thousands of riders rolling up the hill, chic and unrestrained heroism. Awesome, awesome. Nian is the best. Xianxia laughed and cheered for her. The father and daughter seemed to be in a good mood. But at this moment, the staff just now ran to the coach in a panic, and then the two whispered something while looking up at Xianxia on the side. Chapter 539. In the open sky racecourse, the little girl was laughing proudly on the back of her horse. When the horse was running, the rider had to use the strength of his waist and legs to maintain his balance. Therefore, riding a horse was actually a very physically exhausting exercise. In addition, it was currently summer vacation, and the equestrian costume was very tight. Therefore, after one lap, the little girl's face was obviously covered in sweat. She was hot and tired, but she was still smiling from ear to ear. It was as if she had been injected with stimulants. The little girl was eager to try again. She seemed to want to do another lap. However, according to the club's regulations, The rider was not allowed to do obstacle training without the approval of the coach. Therefore, she could only ride the horse and look at the coach from the side. She almost directly interrupted the conversation between the staff member and the coach. During the conversation, the coach seemed to have heard some unpleasant news, so he frowned slightly. Seeing this, the staff member's face couldn't help but flash a trace of awkwardness. Then he continued to explain with a flourish. Looking at the situation, it seemed like there was a problem. Okay, then it's settled. But you'd better explain to Mr. Chen first, in case he complains about you. After a short communication, the coach waved his hand impatiently and signaled the staff member to explain to Xianxia. Although Xianxia was standing outside the racecourse, he still heard every word of the conversation between the two. Therefore, when the staff member hurried over to him, Xianxia was already smiling and waving at Nian. Nian, let the coach help you get off the horse. Come out for a second. Dad has something to tell you. Xianxia wanted Nian to get off the horse. Hearing this, the little girl, who was in high spirits, suddenly became a little unhappy. She shook her head, then pouted and shouted at Xianxia unhappily, "No, I want to run 2 more laps." As she said this, Nian even clamped her legs together as a demonstration. Speaking of which, this little girl was almost 10 years old. In addition to acting cute and coquettishly, she more or less had some rebellious mentality, so she would not listen to and obey Xianxia like she used to. In this regard, Xianxia was not angry. Instead, he turned his head with a smile and looked at the staff walking towards him. "Mr. Chen, I'm sorry. It's like this. Due to the negligence of our staff, the horse that your daughter is riding today is actually a customer's private horse. Now that the client has arrived at the club, the training is about to begin. So, do you think you can forgive our mistake and let us arrange a new horse for your daughter?" The attitude of the staff member was also very sincere. After hearing this, Xianxia just smiled slightly and did not directly express his opinion. In fact, what kind of mistake was this? Because there were too many customers today, the horse farm didn't have their own horses. Thus, they randomly pulled a private horse for official members like Nian to practice. After all, the club needed to make money, so in addition to taking in official members, receiving individual customers was the main source of income for the club. And once the number of users increased, the club's horse would inevitably be in short supply. The club did not want to offend official members, nor did they want to give up on individual customers. Therefore, the club turned its attention to VIP customers. One had to know that VIP customers were all big tycoons. Official members like Nian would at most buy a set of equestrian clothes, but VIP customers directly bought a horse and left it at the club. For example, the white horse that Nian rode today was a purebred horse imported from abroad. Its price was estimated to be comparable to a McLaren. However, no matter how expensive a horse was, it was still a horse. Horse naturally had to be taken out for a walk, just like a dog. VIP customers bought horses to show their status, so they would not often come to the club. Therefore, providing VIP customers' horse for official members to practice became an unspoken rule of the club. Nian encountered such a situation today. She was riding a horse, but the owner of the horse suddenly came to the club. Therefore, no matter how unwilling she was, the staff had to politely ask her to get off the horse. It wasn't as if this had never happened before. It was just that the customers had to change their clothes before riding, so the club had enough time to coordinate. Therefore, no mistakes were made. After all, the horse that Nian rode was their private property, so although Xianxia was a little unhappy, he did not mean to deliberately make things difficult for the staff. Therefore, after listening to the staff, Xianxia turned his gaze back to Nian, and was about to ask Nian to return the horse to them. But no one would have thought. Just as Xianxia was about to speak, there was a sudden cry from the side of the path. "Mom! My horse! Someone is riding my horse!" The moment they heard this voice, not only did the staff's expression change, even Xianxia could not help but frown. "Who are you? This is my horse. Who agreed to let you ride my horse? Come down quickly!" After hearing this shout, Nian could not help but feel a little confused. She rode high on the horse and turned her head to look at the direction of the voice, only to find a little girl about her age standing at the railing of the racecourse, glaring at her. The girl seemed to be very angry. If it were not for the railing, she would have rushed over and forcefully pulled Nian off the horse. The sudden change of events caused Nian's little brain to stop working. She sat on the horse in a daze, and before she could react, the coach beside her hurriedly came to her side and signaled for her to come down quickly. "I'm not coming down." Seeing that the coach seemed to want to forcefully carry her down, Nian was a little unhappy. She immediately pouted, turned her head and shouted at Chen Shi, "Dad, I haven't played enough. Can you let me play for a while more?" Children did not understand the filth between adults. She had not played enough, so of course she would stay on the horse and refuse to come down. For a moment, the situation was a little awkward. Seeing that Nian still refused to come down, the little girl by the railing suddenly blushed, as if she had been provoked by something, and could not help but burst into tears. "Mom, Mom, Mom!" Outside the racecourse, the little girl wailed loudly. Seeing her so pitiful and helpless, Chen Shi could not bear to see her like this. Hence, he did not spoil Nian anymore, and directly went forward to carry Nian down from the horse. Chapter 540. Nian was a good student from the capital-affiliated primary school. Although when she stayed by Chen Shi's side, it was inevitable that she would throw a little tantrum, but her worldview was still very correct. As a matter of fact, after seeing the girl suddenly cry, Nian immediately stopped talking and sat silently on the horse's back. Even when Chen Shi wanted to carry her down, she didn't resist. "Dad, I didn't bully her." The little girl felt wronged. Otherwise, with her usual personality, she would have rushed up to comfort the girl. Speaking of which, Nian was now 9 years old and had already formed a more complete concept of consumption. Therefore, in her mind, she was a consumer who spent money to ride the horse here, so she didn't think she did anything wrong. Maybe the girl saw that she was having fun riding the horse, so she wanted to steal it from her? After all, children like to steal other people's toys. Similar things happened to Wenwen and Mingming too many times, so Nian was already used to it. Nian still didn't understand what was going on. Chen Shi comforted her in a low voice, then held her hand and stood aside, silently waiting for the other party's parents to come. The child was crying very loudly. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was wailing. Therefore, not long after she started crying, a well-dressed lady ran over from the other side of the path. After hearing her daughters crying, the lady ran over in her high heels. Perhaps it was because she paid a lot of attention to maintaining her appearance, so it was impossible to tell the woman's true age from her appearance. "Nan, what's going on? Who bullied you? Come on, don't cry. Mommy will help you." With the comfort of the lady, the little girl finally stopped crying. Then she angrily pointed at Nian and said, "It's her. She rode my Snow White without my permission." Perhaps it was because she had watched too many cartoons, but this white horse held a very high position in the little girl's heart. Therefore, she could not accept anyone else riding her white horse other than herself. "Hey, what's wrong with you guys? Don't you know who this horse belongs to? Who are they? A professional coach? Or a paramedic? Who agreed to let them ride up? I pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to your club, and this is how you take care of my horses? Don't you know how expensive my horse is? Hurry up and ask your manager to give me an explanation." The cause of this incident was very simple. After listening for a while, the woman figured out the crux of the matter, so she pointed the muzzle directly at the staff on the side. The staff member felt bitter inside. Facing the woman's accusation, he opened his mouth a little cowardly, but in the end, he couldn't say a word. He could only stand there and take the scolding with his head down. In fact, this kind of mistake was not easy to make. This was because whenever the private horse of a big client arrived at the club, the staff would carefully observe it for a period of time. Only after confirming that these big clients rarely came to the racecourse would they list the horse as a spare tire. The horse had been in the club for more than half a year, but the owner had never ridden it. Today they had pulled it out for Nian to ride for a while, but they didn't expect that something would happen. As the owner of the horse, the little girl's age was about the same as Nian's, so she could only come to the racecourse to practice during the holidays. She was a child, so naturally, she couldn't be like adults and pay attention to formalities. She wanted to see her horse as soon as possible, so after arriving at the club, she rushed directly to the racecourse, so that the staff didn't have time to mediate. "I'm sorry, Miss Zhuang. Today's incident was caused by the mistakes of our staff. Please calm down first, don't be too agitated." After hearing the commotion outside, the manager hurried to the racecourse. The woman seemed to recognize him, so she immediately turned the muzzle and scolded the manager. One had to know that this lady in front of him was a big client of the club. Who could afford to offend her? Therefore, no matter how bad the woman's scolding was, the coach and staff just stood aside and didn't dare to say a word. The manager kept nodding in agreement, hoping that the woman would calm down. In fact, today's incident had nothing to do with Xianxia. It was all the club's fault. After listening for a while, Xianxia couldn't be bothered with the people in front of him. He looked down at Xianxia and asked, "Xianxia, do you still want to ride? If you want to ride, I'll get them to find you another horse, okay?" "Okay." Hearing this, Xianxia immediately nodded. Although her father didn't say it clearly, she roughly understood the situation and knew that she couldn't ride this white horse in front of her anymore. Therefore, the little girl reluctantly looked at the white horse next to her, then quickly walked out of the racecourse under Xianxia's lead. "Stop! Where are you going?" The woman was still angry at the club for using her horse without permission. Suddenly seeing that Xianxia and his daughter wanted to leave, the woman was instantly angry, so she directly stopped them. After hearing the woman's reprimand, Xianxia immediately stopped. He frowned and turned around to say something. The club manager directly blocked in front of him, then said to the woman with a smile, "Miss Zhuang, these two are also members of our club. Today's incident was mainly due to our mistake in the work arrangement. I hope you don't take it to heart. Why don't we do this? In order to compensate you for your loss, I can represent the club to give you a free maintenance and management package, plus a set of equestrian clothes." The manager's attitude was still correct. He took the initiative to ask the woman for compensation, and at the same time, he took all the responsibility. He only hoped that the woman wouldn't vent her anger on others. However, even if the woman knew that today's incident was caused by the club, she couldn't accept Xianxia swaggering away like that. Didn't she see that her child was still crying? Therefore, if Xianxia didn't apologize, the woman would definitely not let her go easily. "Do you know how much this horse costs? What if it breaks? You pay for it." No, she has to apologize to Nan today before she can leave. For a moment, not only was the club manager stunned, even Xianxia suspected that he had misheard. Apologize? Was this woman crazy? Or was her worldview distorted? Chapter 541. Apologize. After hearing the woman's righteous request, Xianxia couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Did I hear wrongly? Seeing Xianxia's completely unrepentant appearance, the woman suddenly couldn't help but get angry. So, she immediately turned her gun and aimed it at Xianxia. She seemed to have reason and evidence to back it up. "What? Is there a problem? Is it so hard to say sorry? Your child is about the same age as my Nan. As a parent, haven't you taught her that she needs to have basic manners when interacting with others? This horse was originally bought for Nan as a birthday gift. Normally, even I, as her mother, can't ride it, let alone strangers like you. Your daughter rode Nan's horse without Nan's permission. Do you think this kind of behavior is any different from stealing?" After hearing this, Xianxia couldn't help but frown deeper. He opened his mouth and wanted to refute the woman's point of view, but the woman didn't give him a chance to speak. She continued, "Of course you can also push the blame to the club. Then I want to ask you in return. Someone handed you a knife. After you kill someone, can you push the blame to the person who handed you the knife? May I ask which law stipulates this?" After hearing the woman's words, Xianxia was suddenly angered by her and laughed. In this life, he could be considered to have lived for hundreds of years. He had come into contact with unreasonable people, but he had never seen someone who could be so unreasonable to this extent. Was this a crosstalk? If it weren't for the fact that the other party was a woman, Xianxia would have taken Xianxia and left. "What are you laughing at? Do you think I said something wrong? Also, I'm not a petty person. I don't have the leisure to argue with a child. I just hope that as a parent, you can understand that educating a child is not a very easy thing to do. There's a good saying, if you make a mistake, you have to admit it. If you are beaten, you have to stand upright. The reason why I want her to apologize to Nan is to help your child establish a correct sense of right and wrong. At the same time, I want to prevent Nan's heart from continuing to be hurt. Tell me, is my request really too much?" Needless to say, When a woman came up with a crooked argument, she could really turn black into white. If it was an introverted person who had encountered such a situation, perhaps he would have hurriedly asked his child to apologize to the other party and take the blame for this matter without knowing what was going on. Anyway, it was just 3 words. "I'm sorry. What's the big deal?" The woman felt that her request was not excessive at all. But it was a pity. Xianxia and Yan were not the kind of muddle-headed good guys. We choose to be kind, but that doesn't mean that we will condone fallacies. Outside the stable. After the woman expressed her opinion, she looked at Xianxia and his daughter confidently. "Yan, do you think what Auntie said makes sense? Shouldn't we apologize to her?" Xianxia couldn't be bothered with this crazy woman in front of him, so he lowered his head and looked at the little girl next to him. As expected. As soon as Xianxia finished speaking, Yan quickly shook her head. Seeing this, Xianxia couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. Then, he raised his head and looked at this crazy woman in front of him. Xianxia originally wanted to take this opportunity to discuss the child's education with this woman. But what he didn't expect was, just as he was about to refute the woman, Yan suddenly stood up and said to the woman very loudly, "Auntie, you're secretly changing the concept." Hearing this, the woman couldn't help but be stunned. Xianxia lowered his head and looked at the little girl with a surprised expression. Wasn't that right? Wasn't this woman secretly changing the concept? "Auntie, I can promise you. If I really did something wrong, I will definitely apologize to my sister very sincerely. But, what happened today really has nothing to do with me. I didn't know that this horse belonged to my sister, so I listened to the coach's arrangement and rode it. This uncle just said that this was a mistake in the arrangement of work. If you want me to apologize just because my little sister is crying, then I will cry too." As she spoke, Yan's voice couldn't help but lower. It was obvious that the woman's rude request had ruined her good mood, to the extent that she had become somewhat listless. "Yan, let's go." After Yan's voice fell, without waiting for the woman to react, Xianxia directly held Yan's hand and turned to walk to the lounge. Xianxi's patience had reached its limit. Since Yan had said what he wanted to say, he didn't need to add anything else. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he can't reason clearly. Instead of continuing to be entangled with this crazy woman, it was better to leave when she was distracted, and save his ears some peace. Looking at the back of the father and daughter leaving, the woman's face was a little uncertain. Actually, if those words were said by Xianxia, the woman might have 10,000 fallacies to say. But if it was Yan who said it, for a moment, she really didn't know how to continue. Did she really have to argue with a child? So no matter how angry she was, the woman could only stand there sullenly, and she couldn't find a way to vent her anger. Seeing this, the club manager immediately moved in front of the woman, ready to mediate the situation. This farce seemed to be coming to an end. But at this moment, the little girl next to the woman burst into tears again. After all, not every child could be as reasonable as Yan, so she couldn't accept this at all. They secretly rode on her horse, but they didn't even apologize. Once she thought of Yan riding on the back of the horse, that valiant feeling instantly made the little girl feel uncomfortable from the bottom of her heart. It was like a fishbone in her throat. Don't think that children don't have schemes. At least at this moment, the little girl suddenly had a very firm thought in her heart, and that was, cry. She must cry until her mother made them apologize to her. Therefore, she immediately took on the posture of Meng Jianghu, sat on the ground, and started bawling her eyes out. This time, the woman panicked. But no matter how she comforted her, the little girl didn't listen. Instead, she cried and kept repeating, "She rode on my horse, she rode on my horse." It was like Tang Sang chanted the golden hoop spell. Soon, the woman was completely overwhelmed by her daughter's crying. Seeing that Xianxia and his daughter's figures were about to disappear at the end of the road, the woman seemed to have finally made a decision. She couldn't help but say to the little girl with a fierce expression, "Darling, don't cry first. Stand up first. Mother will make the decision for you. She must apologize to you today." Then the woman directly turned to look in the direction she came from, and shouted in that direction, "Ah Biao, stop them for me, don't let them go." Zhouqian Divine Emperor. Chapter 542. Unlike other emerging industries, the moment the martial arts craze arose, It received all kinds of support from the government, both overt and covert. In just 2 short years, the martial arts club relied on the most basic functions of strengthening the body and retaining beauty to successfully replace the fitness industry. At the same time, it also indirectly squeezed out the survival space of the security industry. Now that the trend of practicing martial arts was becoming more and more intense, everyone knew a few practical moves, and social security naturally became a big problem on the table of all levels of government. As the saying goes, where there is a demand, there is a market. Since the market demand was so huge, many large martial arts clubs took advantage of the situation to launch private bodyguard services. At the same time, they also established a cooperative relationship with the Public Security Bureau to assist the police in handling cases in a way similar to the auxiliary police. The Biao that the woman mentioned was the private bodyguard she hired from the Beijing Martial Arts Club some time ago. Since the rich were willing to buy a horse for their daughter to play with, why would they scrimp on security issues? Therefore, the moment the woman finished speaking, a burly man in a tang suit quickly walked toward Xianxia and his daughter. Black suits were no longer popular nowadays. Tang suits and Han costumes were the current trend, and at the same time, it was also the standard for martial artists. This was because only martial artists who registered with the Wu Lian would wear a special Wu Lian symbol on their chest to confirm their identity as martial artists. Just like the police uniform, the Wu Lian symbol was absolutely not allowed to be impersonated. Therefore, as long as someone was wearing a tang suit with a Wu Lian symbol on his chest, that person must be a powerful martial artist, and the kind who could fight 100 people alone. Sir, please wait. Biao was burly and had dark skin. At first glance, one could tell that he was the kind of martial artist who often trained hard under the sun. Although he had tried his best to restrain himself, his fierce temperament still frightened the club manager next to him. Miss Zhuang, this. The club manager wanted to stand up and smooth things over. But before he could finish speaking, the woman had already said coldly, "Don't worry, I am a person of status. How can I make things difficult for them for no reason? As long as they bow their heads and apologize to Nan, then I will pretend that today's incident never happened. My request." At this point the woman suddenly paused. Then, she looked at the manager and asked, "It's not too much, right?" Hearing this, the manager could only squeeze out a bitter smile. He nodded with some difficulty and replied, "Not at all, not at all." It was obvious that this matter had completely become a matter of face. Women were rich. At the same time, he was also a person of status. Therefore, she could not accept how Chen Shi and his daughter treated her and her mother. Apologize. He had to apologize. If they didn't apologize, Chen Shi and his daughter wouldn't be leaving the club today. After hearing the woman's order, Biao quickly caught up with Chen Shi and his daughter. He tried to ask Chen Shi to stop, but Chen Shi acted as if he didn't hear him. He continued to whisper to Nian while swaggering into the lounge. The lounge was not far ahead. Seeing that Chen Shi and his daughter were about to enter the lounge, Biao suddenly became anxious. After all, he couldn't forcibly kidnap Chen Shi and his daughter in front of the boss in front of so many people, could he? Once this kind of behavior was recorded and posted online, Wu Lian would definitely not let him off easily. Biao was more or less depressed in his heart. If it were anyone else, after seeing him dressed like a martial artist, they would definitely stay where they were and obediently wait for him to deal with them. However, Chen Shi didn't take him seriously at all. Along the way, he was talking and laughing with Nian. It seemed that he was just short of turning around and directly saying to him, "Come and hit me." Martial artists couldn't hit people in public, but they could intimidate people. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Biao exerted force on his feet. Like jumping high, he directly jumped over Chen Shi and his daughter's heads and then opened his arms to stop them. This jump, it was at least 2 meters high, right? The manager of the club was dumbfounded. "Sir, I'm sorry. Our boss said that you can't leave. I hope you won't make it difficult for me. Please go back." Biao was still very polite. At least he didn't hit them right away. Therefore, after Chen Shi sized Biao up, he smiled and asked in return, "Go back. Do you want me to go back and apologize? You saw what happened just now, right? Do you think we did something wrong?" Biao had been standing not far behind the woman, so he naturally knew the cause of this incident. Therefore, after hearing Chen Shi's question, Biao's face showed a slightly strange expression. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just following orders." The boss is not a bad person. She was just angry that Nan Nan was wronged. It's just an apology. As long as you are willing to apologize to her, I promise that she won't make it difficult for you. Biao's words were tactful enough. He hoped that Xianxia would give the woman a way out so that he could go back and report to his boss. However, what Biao didn't expect was, after hearing his words, Xianxia suddenly shook his head and laughed. Because he was very disappointed with Biao's answer. The rise of the martial arts craze actually meant that the spirit of martial arts was declining. A martial artist like Qin Shueqing, who had a strong mind and conviction, probably couldn't be found now, right? Qin Shueqing had left Earth for 2 years. Therefore, many times, Xianxia couldn't help but think of that willful and stubborn sister-in-law. Fortunately, the defensive magic treasure he'd given Qin Wanqing hadn't been activated. This meant that Qin Wanqing hadn't encountered any life-threatening danger for now, and this caused Xianxia to feel much more at ease. Because of Biao, Xianxia suddenly thought of Qin Shueqing. However, very soon, this thought was completely thrown to the back of his mind. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Please don't make it difficult for me. Xianxia said to Biao with a serious face. After that, he walked past Biao with Nian. Sir, please wait. Seeing that Xianxia was still going to leave, Biao directly stretched out his arm to block his way. Please make way. Without any superfluous movements, Xianxia directly bumped into Biao's arm. Like a train slowly moving, Biao tried to block Xianxia with force. However, it was fine if he didn't use force. But this force, a huge force that was enough to suffocate people, suddenly burst out from Xianxia's body. Bang! With a muffled sound, Biao's whole body flew out instantly as if he was hit by a train. At that moment, Biao was completely stunned. He only felt that his mind was blank. When he finally came back to his senses, he found that he was sitting under a big tree by the roadside, and the lounge where Xianxia and his daughter were was at least 10 meters away from him. Biao touched his chest and his arm. There was not a trace of injury on his body, not even a trace of pain. It was like a dream. When he woke up, he was already lying under this tree. You! Biao pointed at Xianxia, as if he wanted to say something. However, when Xianxia looked back at him, Biao suddenly felt like a bucket of cold water was suddenly poured on him, and his whole body slightly trembled. Well, I saw that some readers seem to have misunderstood. In fact, I'm not writing a face slap. I want to use this incident to indirectly tell you about the changes in Yan in the past 2 years, and the changes in the whole society. In the end, it seems that I failed again. Chapter 543. With a flash of inspiration in his mind, Biao seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. He looked at Xianxia in horror and asked, You are a necromancer? It was no wonder that Biao was so shocked. As an ancient inheritance passed down from ancient times, the necromancer inheritance was much more mysterious than the martial arts inheritance that rose later. Judging from the current situation in Wuxia, although the martial arts craze was fierce and had forcibly opened up a new era of martial arts practice, there were only a few strong people who could really practice transforming strength and even practice to the gang state. The reason was not that there was no martial arts genius among the 1.3 billion people in Wuxia, but it was because of the inherent flaw of the martial arts inheritance. After all, martial arts was only the product of the necromancer inheritance's decline. It could not be compared with the inheritance of the necromancer. Did you not see how many of the masters at the top of the heaven list had really entered the Tao through martial arts? They relied on their age, experience, and combined with the cultivation methods of the necromancer to cultivate both internal and external, thus stepping into the celestial being realm in one fell swoop. And this was the real reason why Yu Jingzi's incomplete cultivation method was sold for 5 million. It had been more than 4 years since the Wu Lian officially implemented the first 5-year plan. Seeing that the martial arts craze was getting more and more intense, the necromancer inheritance had not caused much of a stir. Was there no one left in the necromancer inheritance? Obviously not. Therefore, it was necessary to mention the classic slogan that Wang Chuanju shouted at an internal meeting. That was, grasp the sequence of the times, subvert and create the future. With the momentum of a thunderbolt, they forcefully incorporated all the necromancer inheritances in Wuxia, and then secretly promoted the rise of the martial arts craze. When the ordinary people gradually accepted the existence of the martial arts, which was far beyond ordinary people, the first 5-year plan would be considered to have been successfully achieved. This plan was also called the Tinder Plan by the Wu Lian. Yu Jingzi had always thought that the Wu Lian was suppressing the cultivation inheritance, so he took the risk of preaching under Tiananmen Square, so he would not understand how narrow-minded he was. In fact, as a State Department, how could the Wu Lian make any decisions that would harm the country's interests? Grasp the sequence of the times, subvert and create the future. Did they really think that this was just a slogan? Revolution does not have to be initiated by the masses. It can also be carried out by the masses led by the state. Since the country wanted to take the lead in starting a revolution, problems would follow. Whose life were they going to overthrow? The answer was obvious. That was, the revolution is the fate of the whole world. It had to be said that Wu Lian was very ambitious. Even if the first 5-year plan had not been completed, the second 5-year plan was already in its infancy. The main goal of the second 5-year plan was to select the most talented martial artists and grant them the corresponding necromancer inheritance to ensure that these people would obey the Wu Lian in the future. In the past, a martial artist's actual combat ability would not be inferior to a necromancer of the same level. They might even be able to crush a necromancer of the same level. But one had to know that things were different now. The heaven and earth spirit chi began to recover, which meant that the cultivation speed of the necromancer lineage began to increase by leaps and bounds. Although martial artists also benefited a lot from this, they still could not compare to necromancers who could draw qi into their bodies. Therefore, under the deliberate guidance of the Wu Lian, a complete and systematic promotion path from ordinary people to martial artists to necromancers appeared out of thin air. Biao also wanted to become a necromancer. However, he neither had enough merit to exchange for cultivation methods from the Wu Lian nor enough money to buy incomplete cultivation methods from the dark web. Therefore, becoming a disciple of a certain necromancer by chance became the most feasible method. Here was something to mention. The Wu Lian did not restrict necromancers from accepting disciples. Therefore, while the martial arts club was developing rapidly in society, the necromancer inheritance was also expanding in secret. However, because the necromancer lineage paid more attention to talent, those who were lucky enough to become a disciple of a necromancer were simply too rare. Over the years, Biao had gone deep into famous mountains and great rivers in an attempt to become a disciple of a certain immortal. Unfortunately, no sect was willing to take him in. Xianxia had just shown a little of his skill, which not only sent him flying more than 10 meters away, but also did not hurt him at all. What was such a wonderful skill if not a necromancer's skill? Therefore, the moment Biao came to his senses, he jumped up from the ground like a carp. "Senior!" Biao shouted as he quickly caught up with Xianxia and his daughter. Xianxia did not pay attention to him. Seeing that Xianxia and his daughter were about to enter the lounge, Biao was so excited that he bent his knees and knelt heavily on the ground in front of everyone present. "I am Tu Biao. I have long heard of the necromancer's elegant demeanor. It is my honor to meet you today. Please." The great era was coming. Therefore, like every martial artist who was depressed, Biao had the idea of becoming a disciple of Xianxia the moment he confirmed his identity. However, what Biao did not expect was, before he could finish his words, Xianxia directly sealed his mouth with her true essence, so that he could only lie on the ground and muffled whimpers. Nian noticed something strange behind her and was about to look back when Xianxia suddenly reached out and put his arm around her shoulder. He lowered his head and asked with a smile, "Nian, did you feel wrong just now? Do you want Daddy to buy you a horse too? Then you can ride it whenever you want, and you don't have to worry about being kicked off the horse in the future." After hearing Xianxi's words, the little fellow's eyes suddenly lit up. Therefore, she immediately ignored the movement behind her and excitedly hugged Xianxia and said coquettishly, "Daddy is so nice." "Then let's go. Daddy will take you to see the horse." Xianxia pretended to leave. But after taking 2 steps, Nian seemed to have suddenly thought of something. She could not help but pull Xianxia and ask hesitantly, "Daddy, is the horse very expensive?" Why do you ask this?" "Because beef is very expensive." Looking at Nian's serious face, Xianxia suddenly did not know whether to laugh or cry. Seeing this, the little fellow was a little confused, so she continued to say, "Daddy, if the horse is too expensive, let's not buy it?" The coach said that the horse can only be ridden here, but it is so far away from home. We have to take a long ride every time we come here. Moreover, I definitely won't have time to come again after school starts. Buying a horse but can't ride it a few times, it feels so wasteful. After hearing Nian words, Xianxia was suddenly shocked. Did this child know to save money for him? When did she become so sensible? Xianxia did not care about money at all, so he always had an attitude of giving Nian whatever she wanted. He did not expect that under these circumstances, Nian did not develop the habit of spending money. Instead, she learned how to look at the value of things correctly. After all, the things in this world, there was no such thing as expensive or not, only value or not. The father and daughter discussed the value of the horse as they walked quickly into the lounge. At this time, Biao looked like he was finally untied. He could not help but have a complicated expression on his face. Then, he slowly stood up from the ground. He stood motionless outside the lounge, completely ignoring the strange looks around him. After a full 5 minutes, the woman could not take it anymore and walked quickly in her high heels to Biao's side. Biao! What are you doing? I told you to stop them. Look at what you've done. You've completely disgraced me. Perhaps it was because she could not accept the fact that Biao knelt in front of Xianxia. In a moment of anger, the woman could no longer maintain her usual elegance. So much so that she directly swore in front of everyone. As the boss, the woman obviously had the right to criticize her bodyguard. But what she did not expect was, after hearing her scolding, Biao changed his usual reserved image and said to her with a serious face, "Boss, this is the last time I'm calling you boss. In the past, because of my identity, there were some words that I could not say. Today's incident left a deep impression on me. I hope it can inspire you. What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. You shouldn't only look at things from your own point of view. This is not good. It's really not good." Speaking of this, Biao suddenly looked at the woman deeply. "You're lucky this time. I'm also lucky. I don't think there will be a next time." After saying this, Biao did not care whether the woman could understand or not. After saluting her politely, Biao turned around and walked straight to the club's door. "You?" The woman was stunned for a long time. After seeing that Biao had walked far away, she stomped her foot and could not help but curse. "Bastard! Just you wait. I'm not done with you." Chapter 544. Perhaps because she didn't want to see that woman again, Nian sat in the lounge for a while before she took the initiative to go home. Her mood was a bit down, but it was understandable. After being reprimanded for no reason, no one would be in a good mood. Although she wanted to use the method of buying a horse to make her happy, Nian hesitated again and again, and in the end rejected this irrational spending proposal. It was obvious that she was a good child who knew how to save money. Seeing the little girl's lack of interest, Xianxia took out his phone and made another suggestion that was enough to arouse her interest. That was crazy racing cartrida. Anyway, both were vehicles, but one was for riding and the other was for sitting. The difference didn't seem to be too big. Therefore, after Xianxia briefly described the game of karting, the little girl's interest was immediately piqued. She even forgot to change her clothes and wanted to pull Xianxia out. As for the unpleasantness just now, the moment the father and daughter walked out of the club, the unpleasantness was all thrown to the back of their minds. It wasn't that they were heartless, but because Nian was kind and Xianxia was generous, the father and daughter simply couldn't let this matter go. Instead of wasting time on these unpleasant things, it was better to seize the time and think of other ways to make themselves happy again. And this was obviously the way of a smart person. This was Nian's ordinary day. In this ordinary day, she would forget all the unpleasantness and only remember the moments that made her laugh. She didn't have a lot of summer homework, nor did she have a variety of tutoring classes. In her last summer of elementary school, Xianxia just wanted her to play to her heart's content. In the blink of an eye, Nian was 9 years old. She was already very mature. Speaking of which, Xianxia now regretted letting Nian skip grades. Because Nian skipped 2 grades, her classmates were all 2 or 3 years older than her. In just one more year, these classmates who lived with her day and night could no longer be called children, but teenagers. Since his classmates had already grown up into teenagers, how could the little guy who spent all day with them not be affected and continue to be young? After all, 11 or 12 years old was the main stage of puberty. Body shape and facial features had significant changes, and the appearance gradually began to resemble that of an adult. Therefore, as long as the child officially stepped into this stage, many parents would suddenly realize, how could in the blink of an eye, the child had already grown so big? Although it was a good thing for the child to grow up. But for the parents, it seemed that it was better for the child to never grow up. Because once the child grew up, the child may no longer be so affectionate to their parents, nor would they be as obedient as before. They had their own thoughts and learned to be rebellious and strong. Among them, the more extreme ones completely ignored family ties and turned to regard love as an existence more important than their own lives. As a result, the question of, if your mother and I fell into the water at the same time, who would you save first? Could actually become the so-called new era's problem. It was really sad and laughable. To be honest, as Nianyan grew older and older, Xianxia couldn't help but worry about personal gains and losses. He didn't want to interfere too much with Nianyan's life, but he was also worried that too much indulgence might lead the child astray. What's more, cultivation and raising children were different. One only needed to work hard to become an immortal. If raising children relied on hard work, the result might be counterproductive. For example, the Peking University matricide case that caused a sensation in the country some time ago. Just thinking about it made one's scalp tingle. Of course, only the parties involved knew who was right and who was wrong. Xianxia couldn't care about others, so he could only do his best to create a complete and happy childhood for Nianyan before she grew up. Perhaps many years later, she would suddenly realize how precious these memories were. Because of the continuous recovery of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, the wheel of history quietly took a sharp turn in these seemingly ordinary days. On the surface, everything seemed calm, but in private, undercurrents were already surging. Earth was ushering in an unknown great change, but Xianxia was still obsessed with his great cause of raising children all day long. Unknowingly, more than 2 months of summer vacation had ended just like that. Nianyan ushered in her 6th grade life, which also meant that his sister-in-law had left Earth for more than 2 months. Perhaps it was because Xianxia had never left Earth so many times, Xianxia couldn't help but think of this willful and stubborn sister-in-law. A little rookie whose cultivation was only at the golden core stage actually dared to go to the Supreme Palace enclosure alone to cause trouble. It would be a lie to say that Xianxia wasn't worried at all. But the good thing was, the Dharma treasure that he had given to Xianxia to protect herself hadn't been activated, which meant that Xianxia hadn't encountered any life-threatening danger for the time being. This also made Xianxia feel a lot more at ease. As long as she was fine, it was fine. In fact, long before Xianxia set off, Xianxia had already given her a detailed extracurricular tutoring. He also used his true essence to simulate an image to show his sister-in-law everything he knew about the Supreme Palace enclosure. The scenery there was as beautiful as a painting. Without asking about spring and autumn, there was no winter or summer. 10 miles of peach blossoms were planted, wine was brewed and tea was brewed, and the clouds on the horizon were like rosy clouds. Of course, in addition to the beautiful scenery, there were also countless aristocratic families and cultivation inheritances there. This was a cultivation holy land comparable to heavenly spiral. In short, that place was very dangerous. In order to make his sister-in-law put away her strong personality, Xianxia even deliberately exaggerated the combined strength of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and the Shenyuan family. Xianxia was overthinking this. Xianxia was very strong, but she wasn't stupid at all. Therefore, as soon as the star Cha flew out of the Haute Nebula, Xianxia obediently listened to Xianxi's instructions and immediately used her Dharma treasure to conceal her whereabouts. After that, Xianxia flew straight to the Supreme Palace enclosure according to the coordinates that Xianxia had provided. This was Xianxia's first time at the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, when she realized that the Supreme Palace enclosure in front of her was very different from the true essence projection that Xianxia had provided, Xianxia didn't choose to leave. Instead, she chose to continue flying toward this mysterious planet. Yes, the Supreme Palace enclosure had changed. It was no longer a floating continental plate in the universe. Instead, it had become a complete planet that was forcefully pieced together by 3 enclosures. After all, Xianxia wasn't an immortal emperor. He, who was far away on Earth, had no idea what had happened at the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, when Xianxia found an area that matched the geographical features of Ning province according to the true essence projection that Xianxia had provided, She drove the star Cha directly to the sky above Ning province where the Shenyuan family was located. Chapter 545. The current appearance of the Supreme Palace enclosure was indeed a little strange. Compared to the Supreme Palace enclosure in Chen Shi's impression, the current Supreme Palace enclosure was at least 3 or 4 times larger. Therefore, if Chen Shi was still here, he should be keenly aware that the uneven irregular sphere covered with a layer of grayish-white fog in front of him was the so-called 3 enclosures. Yuan pronounced Yuan. Homonym. San Yuan. Because of the rare phenomenon of the intersection of the 3 enclosures in 100 years, the Supreme Palace enclosure, Xianxia enclosure, and Ziwei enclosure were like 3 pieces of mud that were forcefully glued together by an unknown force. And it was precisely because of this that the 3 enclosures were not as round and natural as other planets in the universe. Instead, they looked a little strange and awkward. If one really had to describe it, it was like a deformed potato covered with white mold. The current appearance of the Supreme Palace enclosure was very different from the true essence projection that Chen Shi provided to Qin Xueqing before. However, after thinking for a while, Qin Xueqing did not choose to return to Earth for the time being. Instead, she continued to fly to this mysterious planet. On the one hand, it was because Qin Xueqing did not know the details. On the other hand, it was because she had other purposes for this trip. Capturing Changhua was an excuse. Her real purpose was to gain experience. Since it was an experience, she should naturally have the courage to take risks and have the courage to fight. Therefore, even after Qin Xueqing noticed that something was wrong, she still did not turn back. In the end, her sister-in-law still came to the Supreme Palace enclosure. But what she never expected was, after she piloted Xianxia and passed through the grayish-white fog on the surface of the planet, the first thing that came into view was not the scenic spot that Chen Shi described, but a dead land full of death and desolation. What happened to the picturesque scenery there? The former mountains, valleys, and blessed lands had now become deserts and canyons. It was as if a world war had just happened. The entire world was filled with a strong smell of blood. Suddenly, a gust of strong wind swept over, instantly lifting up a cloud of yellow sand and flying rocks that covered the sky. Qin Xueqing stood on Xianxia and observed carefully. Only then did she discover that there were a few people fighting not far away. Moreover, both sides were very strong. They were far from what she could handle. Void Pierce, since your junior brother Reverend Cave Spirit has already subdued the sacred cult, why are you still bitterly holding on? How about this? I will count to 3. Everyone will stop. Then, you will obediently follow me back to meet the sect leader. Maybe the sect leader will be happy and confer you the title of Lord of Supremacy? There were 3 people confronting each other in the field. One of them was Reverend Chongshu, who had once met Chen Shi. In the past, how famous would the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be? Now, it was unknown what kind of unforeseen event had happened, to the extent that Reverend Pierce Void was actually like a stray dog at this moment, being chased all the way here from 1,000 miles away. Bah! How could Junior Cave Spirit be someone who is afraid of death? You keep talking about the sacred cult on your left and right. Why don't you take a look at what your so-called sacred cult has done? If it weren't for those despicable and shameless methods, how could Junior Cave Spirit have fallen into your trap? It's useless to say more. Since you want to bring me back to report on your mission, then come and try. While speaking, Reverend Chongshu was rapidly fighting with the other 2. The strength of the 3 people in the field was roughly the same. They should all be supreme being existences. With such a lineup, even if Chen Shi was here, he could only temporarily avoid their attacks, let alone Qin Xueqing, who was just a mere gold core realm cultivator. Therefore, Qin Xueqing could only pilot Xianxia and carefully hide in the sky. Although this Xianxia had been meticulously modified by Chen Shi, if it wasn't for the fierce battle in the field, her whereabouts would have been discovered long ago. Qin Xueqing had always been fearless. But at this moment, she was really scared. No wonder Supreme Palace enclosure had become like this. It turned out to be caused by the battle between these people? As the saying goes, one can know the depth of autumn by seeing a leaf, and one can know the whole leopard by seeing a spot. Even the supreme being Reverend Chongshu was chased all over the world. Then, how could heavenly venerable existences like the patriarch of the Shenyuan clan and the patriarch of the Tuoba clan stay out of it? It could be seen that this war had been going on for a long time, so much so that Supreme Palace enclosure had completely changed its appearance under the baptism of war. The former blessed land was now a desert wasteland. And with the means of immortal cultivators, could it be that they couldn't turn Supreme Palace enclosure into its former appearance? Therefore, this also meant that, from the moment the war began, the flames of war had never been extinguished. The intensity of the war was simply unimaginable. It had been 2 years. The flames of war had burned every corner of Supreme Palace enclosure. Its scale had even far surpassed the Second World War on Earth, reaching the extent of nuclear weapons bombarding each other. Therefore, the Cultivation Holy Land in Xianxi's memory had become such a dilapidated place today. Battles and killings. Mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Looking at the 3 people fighting in the field, Xianxia hesitated for a moment. In the end, she did not choose to leave. Instead, she hid at the side and continued to spy on the battle. Void Pierce stage stop. I believe you also know. Joining our sect will only bring you benefits and no harm. Why do you have to struggle so hard? During the battle, the Supreme Being from the Holy Sect kept persuading Reverend Xianxia to surrender. Upon hearing that, Reverend Xianxia refused to answer at all. Instead, he took the initiative to attack the 2 of them. I know you have resentment in your heart. But if we don't flatten your jade-clear heavenly abode first, how can the Holy Sect unify Supreme Palace enclosure? As long as you are willing to lower your head and submit, I can promise you on behalf of the Sect Master that I will definitely help you reignite the incense in the future, and ensure that the inheritance of your jade-clear heavenly abode will not be destroyed. What do you think? Although the battle between both parties was very intense, the Supreme Being of the Holy Sect did not kill them. As a result, Reverend Xianxia still had the upper hand even though he was fighting against 2 of them alone. Of course, this advantage was obviously illusory. The battle between insightful Emptiness Realm experts would not be as straightforward as the battle between Gold Core Realm experts and Yuanying Realm experts. Reverend Xianxia knew very well that the other party had the advantage in numbers. If he could not defeat them after a long battle, they would definitely call for reinforcements. By then, it would be difficult for him to escape. Therefore, he did not want to be entangled with the 2 of them any longer. With a flash, he disappeared into thin air from where he was standing. Chase. Seeing that Reverend Xianxia had run away, the 2 Supreme Beings of the Holy Sect did not seem surprised at all. After exchanging a glance with each other, the 2 of them tacitly chased after him. The 3 of them left just like that. Xianxia waited for about half an hour. Then, she carefully drove Xianxia to the place where the 3 of them were fighting just now. The air was filled with the energy that was dispersed from the battle between the 3 of them. Xianxia tried to sense it with her divine sense. However, she discovered that the energy was like a knife. Even if she only touched it slightly with her divine sense, the energy of the true origin would leave a shallow scar on her divine sense. This is Supreme Palace enclosure? Wonderful book house. Chapter 546. After witnessing a battle between supreme martial artists with her own eyes, Qin Wanqing immediately became much more cautious. Qianxi did not lie to her. The danger of the Supreme Palace enclosure was far beyond her imagination. But even so, Qin Shueqing did not have the slightest intention of retreating. Instead, she felt an inexplicable sense of excitement. At that moment, she was like a university student who had just entered society. She was anxious and excited, determined to realize her life's dream in this unknown land. Martial arts and cultivation. These were the ultimate goals that Qin Shueqing pursued in her life. If other people encountered such a terrifying scene, they would probably be so scared that their limbs would go numb and they would be at a loss of what to do. But Qin Shueqing was different. This battle between supreme martial artists, which was rarely seen in 100 years, did not scare her. Instead, it made her yearn for the strength displayed by the 3 of them. She yearned for the ultimate realm that could overlook all living things. If it were not for Qianxi, she might never know what kind of existence above the divinity stage was. And it was also because of Qianxi's appearance that a door to a new world opened for her. The so-called divinity stage. In the eyes of supreme martial artists, what was the difference between them and ants? Qin Shueqing was not willing to be an ant for the rest of her life. So she ignored Xianxi's persuasion and came to the Supreme Palace enclosure alone. In fact, to Xianxia, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually a good place where danger and opportunity coexisted. Just like Heavenly Spiral, where Xianxia used to be. Although Xianxia had experienced many difficulties and dangers in Heavenly Spiral and was almost at the gates of hell. But it was undeniable that Xianxia had also obtained an opportunity that ordinary people could not imagine. What Xianxia wanted now was this kind of opportunity. The air was filled with violent true essence. Xianxia quietly drove Xianxia to the center of the battlefield, trying to gain some insights from the battle traces left behind by the three. Unfortunately, her cultivation was too low, so she couldn't get any useful combat experience from it. Therefore, Xianxia stayed here for about 2 hours before reluctantly leaving on Xianxia. The urgent matter at hand was to find out the exact situation of the Supreme Palace enclosure so that he could plan his next move. Thus, Xianxia continuously circled in the air and spent an entire month observing the movements on the ground. It was during this time that Xianxia discovered a very strange phenomenon. The boundary of the Supreme Palace enclosure was filled with a strange grayish-white fog. Once she steered Xianxia into it, the gray fog would instantly cover her vision. Even her spiritual sense would not be able to sense the things around her. Xianxia keenly sensed a trace of danger, so she decisively retreated. This time, she finally realized the seriousness of the problem. Xianxia didn't pay attention to the changes in the Supreme Palace enclosure before, but after discovering the strangeness of the gray fog, she began to face this problem seriously. Wasn't this gray fog the white mold she saw in space? Except for the area where the Supreme Palace enclosure was located, the sky above the Heavenly Market enclosure and the Purple Myrtle enclosure were covered with a thick layer of white mold. The current Supreme Palace enclosure. No, it should be called 3 enclosures. At this moment, 3 enclosures was like a deformed potato covered with white mold. It was very different from the true essence projection provided by Xianxia. It was obvious. Something must have happened to the Supreme Palace enclosure, so it became like this today. As a member of the Wu Lian Secret Service who had experienced hundreds of battles, Xianxia certainly couldn't be as big-breasted and brainless as Xianxia imagined. She just had a cold personality and had always been too lazy to talk too much nonsense with people. Therefore, after discovering the strangeness of the gray fog, Xianxia immediately steered Xianxia into space again and tried to enter the Heavenly Market enclosure and the Purple Myrtle enclosure from space. However, what Xianxia didn't expect was that, no matter how hard she tried, as long as Xianxia got close to the gray fog would instantly block her vision. There was clearly a gray fog above the Supreme Palace enclosure. But why didn't the gray fog above the Supreme Palace enclosure have any effect on her? Xianxia thought seriously for a long time, but in the end, she couldn't figure out the reason. Obviously, the unknown represented danger. But she wasn't willing to back down like this. So after thinking about it, Xianxia finally decided to find Changhua and Yiji first, and then learn the reason from them. Therefore, Xianxia temporarily put aside the doubts in her heart, turned to steer Xianxia through the gray fog, and came to the Supreme Palace enclosure again. After more than a month of investigation, Xianxia had already memorized the geographical features of the Supreme Palace enclosure, so she soon came to the northern part of Ningzhou. At this point, Xianxia found another problem. Based on her first impression when she came to the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Supreme Palace enclosure should have experienced a protracted war, and the situation was very fierce. The scope of the war was so wide that it was simply shocking. But, after more than a month of observation, Xianxia found that there were no forces fighting with each other except for the group of Taoist Master Void Pierce that she met when she first came to the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 547. Due to the different social structure, there was a big difference in the way of life between cultivators and ordinary people. The most obvious point was, most cultivators in the Supreme Palace enclosure didn't like to live in groups. It was also because of this that there were no large cities in the history of the Supreme Palace enclosure. At most, there were only some large family strongholds or markets. This situation was actually in line with the development of the population. After all, cultivation required the consumption of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Once people gathered together, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth would naturally not be enough to share. Therefore, except for some fledglings with lower cultivation, cultivators above the golden core stage would mostly stay away from the city and open up their own cave abodes in more remote places. Qin Shueqing entered a small city controlled by the Xianyuan family. The original intention of the Xianyuan family to build this city was mainly to protect their bloodline and provide a relatively safe environment for the clan members with lower cultivation to grow. If it was in the past, there wouldn't be too many people in the city. Unfortunately, today was different from the past. As the three enclosures converged, the saint from the Z-Way enclosure suddenly appeared from the gray fog and attacked the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. An unprecedented large-scale war began. The 9 prefectures of the Supreme Palace enclosure were attacked by the saint almost simultaneously. With Ning Prefecture as an example, the Xianyuan, Dongfang, and Tuoba families, who were known as the 3 major families of Ning Prefecture, naturally became the focus of the saint's attention. The slightly different part of the war with the people on Earth was because high-level immortal cultivators had absolute dominance over low-level immortal cultivators, the Holy Church didn't care about immortal cultivators below the nascent soul stage. Instead, they focused all their attention on the 3 family heads and the elders of the various families. As long as the 3 family heads and elders were subdued, Ning Prefecture would naturally be under the saint's command. Therefore, adhering to the battle philosophy of capturing the leader first to capture the bandits, the saint's 12 kings automatically divided into 10 groups as soon as they walked out of the gray fog. The 3 strongest kings faced the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, while the other 9 kings attacked the strongest forces that ruled the 9 prefectures respectively. The saint came to the Supreme Palace enclosure with the mentality of colonists. However, when the 4 sages heard that someone could actually pass through the gray fog and come directly from the Purple Myrtle enclosure to the Supreme Palace enclosure, not only were they not wary of this, they even stood from the perspective of the hosts and warmly entertained the 12 kings, which almost led to a disaster. At the wine table, all of a sudden, the 3 reverend kings attacked, severely wounding Reverend Cavern Spirit, the weakest of the 4 reverends. Even though Taoist Master Void Pierce Stage reacted in time, he could not stop the other party from coming prepared. Therefore, he instantly fell into a disadvantageous position. Why were the 4 spiritual masters so afraid of Chen Shi? It wasn't because Chen Shi was much stronger than them, but because Chen Shi had threatened them with the 10,000-year inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. Either hand over Yuhuan Tianzuan, or face Chen Shi's endless sneak attacks and harassment. Although the 4 spiritual masters were strong, they had countless weak successors behind them that needed to be protected. This was also the real reason why the 4 sage masters had chosen to compromise. Chen Shi alone could intimidate the 4 spiritual masters. Furthermore, the saint sect had specially sent 3 reverend kings to deal with the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. Perhaps it was because they were worried that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven held absolute authority in the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the saint sect had never planned to leave the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven behind. Therefore, the 3 reverend kings fought a huge battle with the 4 spiritual masters in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. As a result, the 10,000-year inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven was destroyed. The flames of war started and soon engulfed the 9 states of the Supreme Palace enclosure. During this period of more than 2 years, the drama of conquest and resistance continued to play out. However, the 12 reverend kings were all supreme being existences. Even if the major forces launched a counterattack under the leadership of the 4 spiritual masters in time, the result was futile. The flames of war burned more and more fiercely, and the major forces also suffered more and more losses. After the Tuoba family of Ning State took the lead to submit to the saint sect and received preferential treatment, the major forces also turned their guns and turned to kill their former comrades. The saint sect only wanted to unify the Supreme Palace enclosure, not kill them all. Since that was the case, why couldn't they submit to the saint sect? Anyway, weren't they under the control of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven previously? Now that they just changed bosses, why couldn't they accept it? Based on this thought, more and more forces chose to submit to the saint sect, and the 4 spiritual masters became stray dogs. The battle that Qin Shueqing saw when she first came to the Supreme Palace enclosure was the saint sect's follow-up operation to capture the 4 spiritual masters. The overall situation was set. Although there were still sporadic resistance forces in the 9 states, they couldn't stop the saint sect's plan to unify the Supreme Palace enclosure. Qin Shueqing came to the Supreme Palace enclosure under such circumstances. After disguising herself, Qin Shueqing hid in the city. She had spent a great deal of effort to gather this information without attracting anyone's attention. Now that the world was too chaotic, one might suddenly be affected by the flames of war if one stayed in the wilderness to cultivate. So many immortal cultivators came to the city to take refuge. These people didn't have high cultivation, but they were very well informed. While chatting with these people, Qin Shueqing found out another very important piece of information. That was, Cheng Hua and Yi Ji went to the Great Illusionary Land and hadn't returned yet. It had been 2 years. According to past experience, the convergence of the 3 enclosures generally only lasted for a month. Once the thick fog dissipated and the 3 enclosures separated, the Great Illusionary Land would be completely closed. Even if someone wanted to stay inside, they would be forcibly expelled at this time. Of course, these secrets weren't known to the public before. It was because of the arrival of the Saint sect that these secrets were made public. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven needed to be mentioned here. The reason why the 4 spiritual masters treated the 12 kings as allies was that the 3 enclosures couldn't be connected at all. It had been mentioned before. Once the 3 enclosures converged, the fluctuation of spirit energy would become abnormally intense, and the fog formed by spirit energy would gradually cover the entire sky. Qin Shueqing had personally experienced the strangeness of the fog before. So no matter how high one's cultivation was, it was absolutely impossible to pass through the fog to go to the Purple Myrtle enclosure and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Yi Ji's previous instigation of Cheng Hua to escape to the Heavenly Market enclosure was actually just a joke. Didn't you see, since ancient times, apart from the Saint sect, who else could freely travel between the 2 realms? The 4 spiritual masters mistakenly thought that the 12 kings came to the Supreme Palace enclosure in the form of avatars. So they held a big banquet in the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to entertain these friends who came from afar. It had to be said. The way the 4 spiritual masters entertained the 12 kings was really like the way the Native Americans first met the European colonists. Note, this might be a bit tiring to read because I'm also tired of writing. But these contents can't be skipped, so I can only try to reduce the length as much as possible. The reason why I suddenly mentioned this. That's because this book had already entered the final stage of completion. Throughout the whole process, I learned a lot from it and also discovered my shortcomings. This is my first 1,000,000-word work. If I say I'm satisfied, then I'm definitely not satisfied. After all, it's a work full of flaws. It's really not good enough, nor is it exciting enough. At least, it's not exciting throughout. Because many of the mistakes are too low level. If I were to rewrite it, the level of excitement would definitely increase by several levels. But if I'm not satisfied, what it has achieved now is actually far beyond what I once expected. So I'm really grateful to all of you for giving me such an opportunity to learn and improve. I won't say much nonsense. Because this is a VIP chapter, you have to pay for it. I'm writing it here so that the pirated readers can also read it. Maybe one day they will also become genuine readers and support me. 200 words for 1 center. This paragraph has a total of 500 words. I'm taking advantage of your 2 cents. I hope you won't criticize me too harshly. The new book has been confirmed. If nothing goes wrong, the title of the book will be, I Really Know Martial Arts. Currently, the title has been registered, but it hasn't been officially released yet. Because I have to save 100,000 words before I release it, I can't keep updating it. When the new book is released, I will open a chapter to explain, so before that, please don't take this book off the shelves. In addition, I will also do my best to finish this book properly. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 548. The arrival of the Holy Church had also indirectly caused the secret of the Great Illusionary Land to be deliberately publicized by some people. From this, Qin Shueqing finally understood why Cheng Hua and Yi Ji had not returned to Earth. It was not that they did not want to come back, but that they had no way to come back. Thinking back, when the secret of the Great Illusionary Land had just been leaked, many people rushed to the Great Illusionary Land with the mentality of giving it a try. Everyone wanted to obtain opportunities and adventures from it, so they did not care about the quota limit. In short, whether the rumors were true or false, they had to try it first. There was no chance before, but now that the opportunity was in front of them, who could resist the temptation? The result was naturally overjoyed. The limit of 3,000 places seemed to have been lifted, so whether it was Jindan or Yuanying, as long as they dared to go, they would definitely be able to enter the great illusionary land smoothly. The sudden surprise also caused the people to lose their rationality. During that time, the battle at the Supreme Palace enclosure was the most intense. The 4 spiritual masters and the 12 kings were fighting fiercely, and the major forces of the 9 regions were also busy resisting the attack of the Holy Church. It was obviously impossible to be distracted and care about other people in a battle of life and death at the supreme level. Instead of staying in the Supreme Palace enclosure and praying that the flames of war would not burn their heads, it was better to risk their lives and go to the great illusionary land. If they really got lucky and luckily obtained some adventure, wouldn't they be able to completely reach the peak of life? With such a fantasy, for a time, there were as many cultivators going to the great illusionary land as carps crossing the river. But as more and more people entered the great illusionary land, no one came back. People finally realized where the problem was. Could it be? This place could only be entered and not exited? After a series of suicidal repeated confirmations, the great illusionary land had completely become a forbidden area in people's minds. As long as no one left alive, no one would dare to break in again. So according to the current situation, Qin Shueqing should never see Changhua and Yiji again. Unless she personally made a trip to the great illusionary realm, she wouldn't even be able to determine whether the 2 of them were dead or alive. And since she couldn't find Changhua and Yiji, what reason did Qin Shueqing have to continue staying in this war-torn and turbulent Supreme Palace enclosure? At that moment, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but hesitate. She even had the urge to immediately return to Earth. But soon, Qin Shueqing's pursuit of martial arts calmed her down once again. If she wanted to concentrate on cultivating in seclusion, why would she bother to come all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? Wasn't the turbulent Supreme Palace enclosure a great stage for her to train herself? Therefore, after adjusting her mentality, Qin Shueqing temporarily settled down in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The Supreme Palace enclosure was a very big stage. Now, she was just a small behind-the-scenes worker. Therefore, Qin Shueqing couldn't help but look forward to the day when she would also step onto the stage. Since her sister-in-law had settled down in the Supreme Palace enclosure, let's talk about Nianyan first. Important things had to be said 3 times. Although Nianyan was only 9 years old now, she was already in the 6th grade. What did it mean to be in the 6th grade? The capital-affiliated primary school didn't have a middle school department, which meant that the children in the 6th grade could do whatever they wanted on campus. Moreover, on the first day of school, the homeroom teacher directly appointed Nianyan to be the class monitor of the 6th grade class 2. The teacher made this arrangement partly to take care of this little girl who had skipped 2 grades. On the other hand, it was entirely because of the good reputation she had built up in the capital-affiliated primary school over the years. Any teacher who had taught Nianyan would be full of praise for this smart, sensible, and clever child. Therefore, the homeroom teacher had a reason not to let Nianyan be the class monitor. Okay, Chen Yan will be our class monitor from now on. She skipped 2 grades in the past and is younger than all of you, so you must not bully her in the future. If I find out that anyone dares to bully her, I'm sure all of you know the consequences. The homeroom teacher of the 6th grade class 2 was a middle-aged man, so he wasn't as gentle as the other teachers. Instead, he pretended to be fierce and gave the class a warning. Remember this. In terms of life, Chen Yan is your little sister. But in terms of studies, you must learn from her. Although she skipped 2 grades, she still scored 100% on the pretest. But what about all of you? Okay, I won't say anything more. Everyone be alert and let's start class now. On the podium, the homeroom teacher lectured with spittle flying everywhere. Then he patted Nianyan's shoulder and squeezed out a smile. Chen Yan, you're small, so you'll sit here in the future. The teacher pointed to the seat closest to the podium. Then, Nianyan carried her school bag and obediently came to this excellent place with good feng shui. It was a little strange. Nianyan was short, so it was reasonable for her to sit in the first row. But her deskmate was not only taller than her, she was also much bigger. Sitting there, she was like a pagoda that could suppress demons. She could practically block the view of the students behind her. Moreover, she was a girl. A fat girl who weighed at least 150 pounds. Suddenly meeting such an outstanding classmate, Nianyan couldn't help but take a second look at her. But she didn't expect this fat girl to treat her as if she didn't exist. Even though the whole class was paying attention to Nian, the fat girl still shrugged her head and turned a deaf ear to everything around her. Soon, Nian's first class in the 6th grade class ended. As a new classmate, Nian felt that she had an obligation to take the initiative to integrate into the group. So, she took the initiative to greet the fat girl next to her across the aisle. "Hello, I'm Chen Nian. What's your name?" Nian had skipped 2 grades, so she already had experience. So, her adaptability could be said to be very strong. She didn't feel shy at all. Who would have thought? Nian wasn't afraid of strangers, but the fat girl next to her was. She just patted the girl's arm out of courtesy, but she didn't expect the girl to be so scared that she started trembling. Nian's face was full of black question marks. She thought that she had accidentally scared the girl. But before she could apologize, the fat girl directly covered her head with her hands and then leaned over the table like an ostrich. The classmate behind Nian also saw this scene. So, this boy who looked like a skinny monkey immediately pointed at the fat girl in front of him and laughed loudly. "Chen Nian, ignore her. She's a fool." "Ha ha ha, fool, big fool. Ha 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 ha." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 549. Today was the first day of school after all. Except for Nian, everyone in the class was old acquaintances. Therefore, after a summer break, everyone naturally had endless topics to talk about with each other. Perhaps wanting to attract everyone's attention, this skinny monkey-like boy saw the interaction between Nian and the chubby girl and deliberately laughed loudly. And such a pretentious laugh naturally attracted the attention of the other students in an instant. All of a sudden, Nian's position became the focus of the entire class. "Yo, isn't this the big idiot in our class? I haven't seen you for a few months. Why are you still so fat? Didn't your mother tell you to lose weight?" Ha 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 ha. Unlike Nian who skipped 2 grades, most children who studied to the 6th grade were concentrated at the age of 11 or 12, which was basically half a teenager. In addition, children nowadays were very precocious, so they naturally knew more than the children of Chen Shi's generation. Of course, being precocious didn't mean being sensible. It was precisely because of this that introverted children were more introverted, and extroverted children were more extroverted. When toys and cartoons were no longer their only pursuit, teasing and ridiculing their classmates became a way for them to relax. Put yourself in their shoes? Put yourself in their shoes and think for others? Sorry, children at the age of 11 or 12 didn't understand this slightly complicated theory. Just like a joke that was once popular on the internet, a reporter went to the South Pole to interview a group of penguins. He asked the first penguin, "What do you do every day?" The penguin replied, "Eat, sleep, play with Dowdo." Then he asked the second penguin. The penguin still replied, "Eat, sleep, play with Dowdo." The reporter asked the other penguins with confusion, but the result was the same in the end. So, the reporter continued to ask 99 penguins like this. When the reporter asked the 100th little penguin, the little penguin gave a different answer, "Eat, sleep." The reporter asked in surprise, "Why don't you play with Dowdo?" The little penguin pouted, glared at the reporter and replied, "I am Dowdo." Was this really a joke? No, no, no. In fact, it was a complete tragedy. Because behind the 99 happiness, there was always a hidden pain that had no place to complain. The fat girl's name was Li Tangyue. This was a poetic name, but unfortunately, it did not match her appearance at all. Li Tangyue was 12 years old this year. She was 1.6 meters tall, but her weight was an astonishing 150 kilograms. When she stood there, she was like a big bucket. Unfortunately, she was diagnosed with childhood non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, also known as severe fatty liver disease. This kind of disease was not fatal and could be eliminated by recuperation. Therefore, after some treatment, Li Tangyue's parents let the child go back to school. And this was the beginning of Li Tangyue's tragedy. She used to be a lively and cute little girl. However, as her body grew fatter, Li Tangyue gradually became silent and her grades began to plummet. Although the head teacher of the 6th grade class 2 was a male teacher, he still noticed the change in Li Tangyue's mentality. Therefore, in order to encourage and help the child, The teacher moved Li Tangyue to the first row so that she could be urged to study hard at any time. Her teacher's intentions were good. But this arrangement directly led Li Tangyue to walk from behind the scenes to the front of the stage, as if there was a spotlight on her at all times. From the day she moved to the first row, Li Tangyue felt that dozens of pairs of eyes were following behind her at all times. Her classmates were all looking at her. Her classmates were all laughing at her. She was afraid that her broad body would block the line of sight of the students in the back row, so she always bent her waist and hunched her back, trying her best to shrink her head. She never dared to go to the toilet because she was afraid of the strange gazes from both sides of the corridor. She tried hard to hide herself, but the spotlight on her became more and more dazzling. She was different from Nian, who was a white swan that everyone loved. She was born an ugly duckling that no one liked. In order to lose weight, Li Tangyue tried to go on a hunger strike. But, even if she was so hungry that she was about to faint, her weight did not decrease at all. Instead, it increased a little. Because she was fat, she suffered a huge psychological pressure that she should not have to endure at her age. For those students with obvious physical disabilities, it was precisely because of their obvious physical defects that they were not easy to bully and ridicule. Because their weakness was reflected on the surface. Even children knew that they could not bully the disabled, let alone these 11 or 12-year-old teenagers. Li Tangyue was different. She did not have any obvious disabilities. She was just plain fat. Therefore, mocking her for being fat had gradually become a custom in grade 6, class 2. Regardless of whether they were boys or girls, regardless of their conduct, regardless of whether their grades were good or bad. In short, everyone was disgusted and disliked this fat girl who was like a bucket. Almost every class had children who were ostracized. But children like Li Tangyue, who were both ostracized by others and ostracized by themselves at the same time, were very few. How could the pressure and pain she was enduring in her heart be understood by ordinary people? Hearing the words big fool constantly ringing in her ears, Nian suddenly woke up from her shock. Why did everyone call Li Tangyue a big fool and not a big fatty? Wasn't it because she was stupid? When she was mocked by others, she would only bury her head deep in her arms like an ostrich. Chapter 550. Her announcement shocked the entire class. Everyone seemed to be unable to understand the reason behind Nian's anger, but after seeing her serious expression, no one dared to stand up and oppose her. Skinny Monkey was sitting behind Nian. He opened his mouth to speak, but in the end, he swallowed the ridicule that was about to come out. After all, a 6th grader was not young anymore. Everyone had their own thoughts. Although Nian had attacked everyone in the class, this method of not specifically targeting a particular person would not cause everyone to be angry. Otherwise, it would be impossible for everyone to attack her. Nian had just joined the class, so everyone was still unsure of her personality, so it was impossible for them to get into a conflict with her over such a small matter. Therefore, after a short period of silence, the classroom immediately returned to its usual clamor. Everyone ignored Nian. Those who were fooling around continued to fool around, and those who were chatting continued to chat as if the unpleasant incident had never happened. Although Li Tangyue did not raise her head, she could hear the movements around her. Seeing that everyone was no longer ridiculing her, Li Tangyue carefully raised her head to observe her surroundings. Nian saw her actions, so she smiled at her and then sat back down in her seat as if no one was around. "Thank you." Looking at Nian's calm appearance, Li Tangyue hesitated for a moment before carefully thanking her. "It's okay. If anyone dares to bully you in the future, just tell me. I'll make the decision for you." Perhaps because she had done a good deed, Nian was in a good mood, so she did not care about the strange gazes around her and directly patted her chest to accept this little brother. Soon, the break between classes was over. The second class began. Nian secretly observed Li Tangyue for a while. Only then did she realize that she liked to deliberately bend her body in class, as if she was afraid that she would block the view of the students behind her. Therefore, as soon as the class ended, Nian went straight to the form teacher's office and told her thoughts. She hoped that the teacher could move Li Tangyue to the window so that Li Tangyue would not block the other students. At the same time, she also hoped that the teacher would let her sit behind Li Tangyue. This way, she could protect Li Tangyue at any time and prevent her from being ostracized by her classmates. The teacher decisively agreed to her request. And this was the privilege that Nian had as a merit student, the leader of the young pioneers, and the class monitor of Year 6 Class 2. It had to be said that Nian really did things swiftly and decisively. After receiving the teacher's warning, she took advantage of the break between classes to quickly complete a series of seat changes. At this point, Nian and Li Tangyue had become the unshakable front and back seats. And it was precisely because of Nian's appearance that Li Tangyue's gloomy primary school life finally ushered in a ray of light. After school in the afternoon, Nian told Chen Shi all the good things she had done today. Although Chen Shi already knew what had happened, he still pretended to be very surprised and then praised the little girl. Although Nian always had the attitude of a class monitor in school, in front of Chen Shi, she would always be that little girl who never grew up. Therefore, after hearing Chen Shi's praise, the little girl immediately showed a proud look and walked with a bouncing and jumping non-stop. The father and daughter walked leisurely for a while. At this time, Nian seemed to have thought of something and suddenly turned to Chen Shi and said, "Dad, we won't do the exercises between classes in the future, and we won't have PE class either." "And why? Didn't the Ministry of Education stipulate that schools must have PE class?" Hearing this, the little girl's face was filled with excitement and said, "We'll change to martial arts. In the future, we'll practice our hut fist during the exercises between classes, and PE class will also be changed to martial arts class." This was important news that the teacher announced before school ended so that the children would remember to tell their parents at home. Practice our hut fist during the exercises between classes? Changing PE class to martial arts class? So fast. The moment he heard this news, Chen Shi couldn't help but frown slightly. He remembered Grandpa Deng once said, the popularization of computers had to start from a child's age. 30 years had passed in the blink of an eye. Computers had long been popularized, and now it was martial arts' turn? Martial arts had the function of strengthening the body, so using our hut fist to replace the exercises between classes seemed to be a very normal operation. After all, this was only a set of beginner-level fist techniques. Could it be that they really expected the children to rely on this set of our hut fist to practice obvious strength? Practicing martial arts was so hard, if they didn't slack off and cheat, the teacher should thank the heavens. However, everything had to be thought deeply. This seemed to be a simple move to cater to the current trend, but there was a deeper meaning behind it. If Chen Shi guessed correctly, once the Arhut fist entered the school and officially entered the stage of popularization, the Wu Alliance would then select the most talented and outstanding children and send them to a newly established national exemplary school. A special school that only taught cultivation and nothing else. Chen Shi was slightly lost in thought. The little girl waited for a while. Chapter 551. Nine Young Divine Art? Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard the little girl's words. Let's not talk about whether Chen Shi knew the Nine Young Divine Art or not. Even if he followed the original text and forcefully derived a technique similar to the Nine Young Divine Art, this technique was obviously not something Nian could practice. After all, how could a girl practice the Nine Young Divine Art? If she wanted to practice it, she should practice the Nine Yin Sutra. No wonder the little girl didn't forget Nian's Nine Young Divine Art. With the rise of martial arts craze, Wuxia dramas naturally regained their vitality. Classics such as the Condor Shooters trilogy and the Smiling, Proud Wanderer were replayed on TV over and over again every day. Although Nian was a girl, didn't she often use the 18 dragons subduing palms and 9 solitary swords when she played with Wenwen and Mingming? When he saw his daughter foolishly shouting out the 18 dragons subduing palms, Chen Shi didn't think much of it. He only thought that the child had grown up, so her interests and hobbies had changed. Now that he thought about it, Chen Shi realized that he took it for granted. The reason was that the seed of cultivation had already been planted in the little girl's heart. And now it was time for this seed to break through the soil and sprout. You silly child, the Nine Young Divine Art is only passed to males and not females. Didn't you listen to the lines carefully when you were watching TV? If a girl practices the Nine Young Divine Art, she will grow a lot of facial hair like a man. So even if Daddy really knows this technique, there's no way I can teach it to you. After hearing the little girl's request, Chen Shi smiled and rubbed her head. Hearing this, the little girl suddenly pouted with slight disappointment. I can't learn the Nine Young Divine Art. I'm so angry. VV. Then I want to learn the muscle bone strengthening scripture. I don't know how. Wave-like subtle steps? I don't know how either. Star-absorbing technique? Daddy! Then what do you know? In the end, the little girl's face was already full of unhappiness. Because in her heart, her father was an omnipotent Superman, but now he said that he couldn't do anything. Therefore, in Yanyan's eyes, this was clearly Xianxia's excuse for not wanting to teach her martial arts. Just now, he had clearly said that he would teach her a martial art that was more powerful than the Arhut fist, but in the blink of an eye, he had started to change the topic and started to laugh. How could she be happy? Humph! Daddy is the most shameless. Thinking of this, Nian no longer paid attention to Xianxia. Carrying her backpack, she angrily strode forward, clearly wanting to distance herself from Xianxia. Yo, who made our family's darling angry again? It was rare to see Nian throw a tantrum. Let's go, Daddy will teach you the supreme martial art. Daddy believes. The day you complete your studies will be the day you become famous throughout the world. Time flew. Soon, another month had passed. During this time, Nian spent the rest of her time diligently learning Qin's cloud hands, other than going to school as usual. This time, Xianxia took out something that could really fight. It was different from the qi refinement method from before. Speaking of which, learning martial arts was really hard work, at least 10,000 times harder than quietly meditating and refining qi. But the strange thing was, not only did Nian not feel that it was hard, but she also enjoyed it every day. If it wasn't for the agreement between father and daughter that she couldn't secretly practice at school, she would have already mastered the entire set of Qin's cloud hands. Seeing Nian working so hard, Xianxia was gratified, but he couldn't help but worry. In terms of cultivation, this child wasn't as free and undisciplined as him, nor was she as carefree as her mother. Instead, she was like Qin Xueqing, obsessed and fanatical? Could it be, Nian would also be a martial arts maniac in the future? When he thought of Qin Xueqing's behavior that no man liked, there was only one thought left in Xianxia's mind. Chapter 552. In this crisp autumn September, we welcome the autumn sunshine and the season of harvest, welcoming the cheerful and exciting school sports meet. Early in the morning, all the teachers and students of the school came to the sports field. Under the guidance of the teachers, some of the students arranged the venue, some of them tidied up their clothes, and some of them set up the sports equipment. Everyone was extremely busy, causing the originally quiet sports field to suddenly become lively. As the principal announced the start of the sports meet, the capital-affiliated primary school also officially ushered in the new autumn sports meet. Ah, look! The moment the passionate athletes' marching song sounded, one class after another lined up neatly and strode toward the rostrum. They were all wearing bright clothes with smiles on their faces. They were full of vitality as they strode with their heads held high. They exuded the unique vitality of youth. On this day, October 15th, the National Day holiday had just ended. A few days after the children returned to school, the school officially announced the date of the autumn sports meet. Was there going to be a sports meet again? For the children, the sports meet was as important as Children's Day. This also meant that the children who had just finished the National Day holiday could play freely for 3 days. How could the children not be excited? As a famous key primary school in the country, once the autumn sports meet was held, the TV station would immediately send reporters to interview the students. At the same time, the district leaders would also lead a team to participate in the opening ceremony of the sports meet. Although the reporters and district leaders only showed their faces and left, to the students of the school, being able to show their faces on TV was obviously a very glorious and important matter. So, how could they show their faces in front of the leaders? The simplest way was to be the host of the opening ceremony of the sports meet. In addition to taking on the role of announcing the opening ceremony, the host also had to stand on the rostrum and make a declaration of sportsmanship. Therefore, the popularity of this position was even higher than that of the captain of the young pioneers. Nian was now the big sister of the 6th grade. Previously, due to her lack of qualifications, she had not been able to take on such a good job. Now that she finally had enough experience, the moment she took on this beautiful task, Nian wrote a 1,500-word opening speech. Then, She read it in a cadence in front of all the teachers and students. She was not afraid at all. Because she knew her father would definitely be on time in front of the TV and watch her shine on stage. I declare. This year's autumn sports meet of the capital-affiliated primary school. Now, let's begin. Following Nianyan's command, the field suddenly burst into an earth-shattering cheer. Seeing all the teachers and students in the school fall into a state of almost fanatical excitement, Nianyan couldn't help but have a sweet smile on her face. She really liked this kind of lively feeling. Unfortunately, the announcer and host didn't have to participate in the competition, so she couldn't show off her skills on the stage. Although it was just a small primary school sports meet, under the arrangement of the teachers, this year's autumn sports meet was held decently. Regardless of whether it was the field competition, track competition, or fun competition, other than the more competitive individual events, the teachers did not forget to arrange a series of group competitions. This not only emphasized the sportsmanship of friendship first and competition second, but also allowed the children to understand what true unity was. The competition was in full swing. The first day was the track competition, the second day was the field competition, and the third day was the group competition. Although the group tug-of-war held at the end successfully pushed the atmosphere of the sports meet to the peak, this also meant that this year's autumn sports meet was about to come to a successful end. On the rostrum, Nianyan took out the closing speech she had prepared and was about to announce the successful end of this year's autumn sports meet. However, the principal suddenly came to her side and directly grabbed the microphone from her hand. Hey, students, quiet down. I have something important to announce. Just now I received a notice from the higher-ups. This year's autumn sports meet will add an additional competition event, so the end of the autumn sports meet will be postponed for 2 days. As for the competition content, I'll keep you guessing for now, I'll tell you tomorrow. Okay, that's it for today. Students, go home and have a good rest. Come back tomorrow to participate in the competition. Speaking of this, the principal suddenly paused and then continued with a serious face. Teachers of all grades and classes, gather at the big conference hall at 7 o'clock in the evening. I have something important to announce here. Following the principal's inexplicable speech, the autumn sports meet, which was supposed to end, was unexpectedly postponed for 2 days. They could play for 2 more days. While the children were happy, they were also intrigued by the additional competition content mentioned by the principal. Therefore, early the next morning, all the teachers and students of the school waited on the field as early as a few days ago. Everyone was eagerly waiting for the principal to officially unveil the mystery. What kind of competition was it? Why was it so mysterious? Okay, is everyone here? Now I announce. The first martial arts competition of the capital-affiliated primary school officially begins. Now, please introduce the rules of the competition to the students of each class. Registration will begin in half an hour. After hearing the words martial arts competition, there was a sudden burst of exclamations on the field. Even before the teacher explained, many of the senior children had already reacted. Martial arts competition? Wasn't it just for them to fight? Was this also a competition? In fact, the reason why the principal did not publicly announce today's competition content yesterday was to prevent the children from going home and telling their parents, which would cause conflict among their parents. After all, a martial arts competition was not the same as a running race. Although the school had already prepared combat protective clothing, in this kind of close combat situation, even with protective clothing, the school could not guarantee that the children would not be injured. Therefore, the principal knew that parents would never agree to let their children participate in this kind of competition. But the higher-ups asked him to take this opportunity to successfully hold a perfect martial arts competition, so as to set a new example for the country's primary and secondary schools. As long as the capital-affiliated primary school organized this martial arts competition beautifully, it would naturally be much easier for the Wu Lian to promote martial arts competitions to the whole country. The principal was caught in the middle and in a dilemma. In the end, he had to make such a decision to act first and report later. In short, just hold the competition first. Wasn't it just a martial arts competition? Have you watched a taekwondo competition? How could children have the strength to be injured wearing protective clothing? Anyway, as long as no children were injured, he would have a way to appease the angry parents. What? You said the family head was not satisfied with the school's arrangement? You want to complain to the Education Bureau? You are not satisfied no matter how I explain? If you are not satisfied, you can drop out. Chapter 553. Because it was the first time the school held a martial arts competition, the principal held an emergency discussion yesterday. The topic of the discussion was naturally the slightly different martial arts competition today. Since the school had no relevant experience in undertaking it, they would have to find their way to do it. Only by doing this beautifully and properly could the capital-affiliated elementary school live up to its title as the National Exemplary Elementary School and continue to set a new example for the nation's primary and secondary schools. There was no other way. Who asked the higher-ups to give such an important task to the capital-affiliated elementary school? The burden on their shoulders was indeed heavy. The principal felt that the task was heavy, but the teachers felt that the task was a little hot. After all, this was not a track and field competition. Although martial arts had been particularly popular in the past 2 years and most of the children in the class had signed up for the martial arts training class, the teachers were still a little uncertain if they really wanted to compete. Even if the child succeeded in winning the first place, after the parents received the news, they might immediately chase to the school and then make a fuss about it and insist that the teacher give an explanation. Why should my child participate in such a dangerous competition? What if the child is injured? A martial arts competition? Isn't it just a fight? Which school encourages children to fight? Ordinary teachers at most received a fixed salary. How would they dare to easily offend the parents? Therefore, when the principal announced the official start of the martial arts competition, the teachers of each class carefully explained the content discussed in yesterday's meeting to the children. During this time, the teachers even explicitly and implicitly emphasized that no one was forced to participate in this martial arts competition. Everything was voluntary. Even if no one in the class signed up for the competition, the teachers would not feel embarrassed at all. Instead, they would be secretly happy. No one participated, which meant that no one would be injured. It saved them a lot of trouble and worry. How good was that? However, what the teachers never expected was the children's enthusiasm for this martial arts competition was far beyond their imagination. In the class with the most applicants, there was even a situation where the whole class wanted to sign up. Whether it was a boy or a girl, regardless of age, regardless of introverted or not. All the children who had participated in the martial arts training class raised their right hand high at that moment. Even the little girl who had always been well-behaved and clever, after hearing the teacher ask, "If you want to sign up, please raise your hand," she actually raised her little hand at the first moment. The teacher was stunned. Why was it so different from what they imagined? Were the children nowadays so violent? Were they not afraid of being beaten at all? Chen Yan, put your hand down. The martial arts competition is held between people of the same grade. Look at that small body of yours. Who can you beat on the stage? You're not allowed to participate. It's settled then. All right, a class can only have a maximum of 5 participants. Now, I will choose the participants. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, the teacher decisively decided to have the final say and stripped Nian of her right to participate in the competition. When Nian heard this, she pouted unhappily and retorted, "Teacher, I know martial arts. I will be the Qin Shi Yun hand. Dad taught me. It's even more powerful than Ahut fist." As soon as he said this, the whole class burst into laughter. As the old saying goes, there is no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. If they were to compare academic results, Nian would claim second place, and no one in the class would dare to claim first place. However, if it was a martial arts competition, the entire class would not accept her as the class monitor. Nian was only 9 years old. Everyone in the class was 2 or 3 years older than her, but they couldn't outdo her in terms of academics, and they couldn't even beat her in fights? Who would be able to take this lying down? No one took Nian seriously, and this made her very angry. However, just as Nian was about to continue speaking and fight for herself, a discordant voice suddenly sounded from the back of the classroom. "Teacher, why don't we let Li Tangyue participate? Look at her body. If she stood on the stage, she would be able to kill someone just by sitting down, right?" Ha 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 ha. As soon as these humiliating words came out, the entire class burst into laughter. The teacher was stunned for a moment and did not reprimand her immediately. Instead, she subconsciously thought about the possibility. That's right. Didn't children fight to see who had the bigger body? Li Tongyue's body was indeed quite intimidating. If it were other mischievous children with Li Tongyue's body type, the teacher would definitely send them to the competition without hesitation. However, with Li Tongyue's introverted and almost depressed personality, sending her to the martial arts competition was equivalent to sending her to the execution ground. Therefore, the child who made this suggestion had ulterior motives. She clearly wanted to see Li Tongyue make a fool of herself. Thinking of this, the teacher finally came back to her senses, so she deliberately pretended to be angry and scolded sternly. "Who said this? Stand up for me." The teacher originally just said it casually and wanted to intimidate the children in the class. Chapter 554. Teacher, I'm also a first-stage martial artist. Why can she participate, but I can't? Nianyan's clear questioning voice suddenly sounded in the classroom. The teacher's face slightly changed on the spot. This child. How could she be so disobedient? The reason why the teacher didn't allow Nianyan to participate in the martial arts tournament was out of good intentions. He didn't think that this little girl would act like she ate the wrong medicine today, insisting on standing up to make him unable to back down. I'll say it again. This martial arts tournament is held between the same grade. You're already in the 6th grade, so your opponents are at least 2 or 3 years older than you. Are you sure you want to participate? The teacher's face was a bit ugly. But because of Nianyan's usual performance, the teacher didn't care about her contradicting behavior, and once again emphasized the cruelty of the martial arts tournament. He tried to persuade Nianyan to give up this inexplicable idea. After all, children can't be compared to adults. A 2 or 3 year age gap will directly cause the two sides to never be on the same level. Professional boxing matches are divided into lightweight and heavyweight weight, but this martial arts tournament, because of the lack of experience, did not pay attention to the details. As long as Nianyan signed up for the tournament, it means that she may meet Zhao Yu, who is taller than her, heavier than her, and even have longer arms and legs than her. Isn't this just looking for abuse? The teacher really didn't want Nianyan to participate, but this time Nianyan was like a tortoise that ate a scale, determined to participate in the tournament. Teacher, I'm sure. Hearing Nianyan's resolute answer, the teacher frowned and thought for a while, then finally agreed to her request. Okay, then I'll count you in. The teacher thought that Nianyan really had the strength of a first-stage martial artist. But in fact, Nianyan didn't even go to a martial arts training class. Where can she find a martial artist qualification certificate? This little girl lied. She learned how to lie. And the reason why Nianyan did this on one hand was because she really wanted to participate. On the other hand, it was entirely because of Zhao Yu. Just like how Zhao Yu was unhappy with her, Nianyan had been unhappy with Zhao Yu for a long time. In Nianyan's eyes, Li Tongyue was a kind and pitiful girl. She was just a little fatter. Did she get in anyone's way? Why did she have to be bullied every day? Although the whole class was ostracizing Li Tongyue, after Nianyan's observation during this period of time, she found that there were only a few people who were taking the lead. One of them was Zhao Yu. What was even more infuriating was that Zhao Yu's bullying methods were much better than Skinny Monkey's. At most, Skinny Monkey would take the lead to kick up a fuss. He didn't really hate Li Tongyue. However, Zhao Yu didn't know what was going on. It was as if Li Tongyue's existence would lower her beauty, so she spent all day thinking of ways to target Li Tongyue. Even if she unintentionally passed by Li Tongyue, Zhao Yu would unintentionally leave behind 1 or 2 sarcastic words to hurt Li Tongyue's fragile heart. As the saying goes, hurtful words were like sharp knives. The person who said it was calm and indifferent, but the person who heard it was covered in cuts and bruises. In school, this kind of sharp-tongued girl was the most difficult to deal with. It was fine if she called out her name, but she didn't do that. There were a few times when Nianyan was on the verge of exploding, but in the end, she forced herself to hold it in. There was no other way. She really couldn't find anything that could be used against Zhao Yu, so she couldn't stand up for Li Tongyue. Looking at Li Tongyue's increasingly depressed mental state, Nianyan felt that she needed to properly vent her anger for her. Zhao Yu, Chen Yan, who else in our class is a first-stage warrior? Wang Xiaohu, you too? Okay, then the 3 of you will go together. Zhao Yu and Nianyan were both girls, so the teacher looked left and right. In the end, he chose the strongest boy among the children who raised their hands. After the class teachers submitted their class's contestants, the school quickly came up with a decent competition schedule. To be honest, the enthusiasm of the children was a bit out of the principal's expectations. He originally thought that there wouldn't be enough participants for this competition, but the result was completely different from what he imagined. If it weren't for the teachers who noticed that something was wrong and promptly asked the principal to limit the number of participants, the number of people who signed up would have increased by several times. Okay, all the teachers of each class have received the competition schedule, right? I now announce that the first martial arts competition of the capital-affiliated primary school officially begin. Referees, please take your positions. Following the principal's order, a dozen or so temporary martial arts instructors took on the role of referees for this martial arts competition. Because of their age, children under the 3rd grade didn't need to compete. They only needed to perform a complete set of Arhut fists, and the referees would score them based on their performance. The one with the highest score would be the champion. This kind of competition naturally wasn't worth watching. Therefore, when the 4th grade students went on stage, the atmosphere was instantly pushed to the peak. The school found a lot of gymnastics mats and neatly spread them on the field, suddenly turning the field into a huge open-air arena. The small players wore full protective suits and were eager to try. Chapter 555. Although the Arhut fist could be considered a martial art with killing power, there were only a few people who could truly master it through a comprehensive study of its martial arts. In fact, this is the same as learning the piano. The piano was born in 1700 and has a history of more than 300 years. But until today, how many people in the world can play the piano, and how many people are proficient in the piano? Therefore, in just a few years, no matter how turbulent the momentum of the martial arts craze is, ordinary people without the guidance of a master and without the relevant experience can only put on a show at most. There are still too few people who can really rely on their talent and self-learning. And even adults can't use the true power of Arhut fist, let alone these children who are less than 10 years old? So, the capital-affiliated primary school's first martial arts competition turned into a farce. Looking at the children on the stage, the teachers couldn't help but shake their heads and laugh. The children did try very hard. At least their starting positions were decent. But when it came to the real fight, their silly and cute appearance didn't make people feel threatened at all. It has to be said, the way they fight seriously is really too cute. In the end, the 4th grade's championship trophy was won by a little fatty relying on his physical advantage. As soon as the 4th grade's competition ended, it was the 5th grade's turn to go on stage. It can be seen that there is still a big difference between the 4th grade and the 5th grades. Especially when it comes to making moves, the 5th grade's children can already make a gorgeous combination of straight punches and leg sweeps. Although they still can't use the 3 sunflower style to catch the 8th grade's gorgeous combo. As the contestants get older and older, the level of excitement of the competition begins to rise. Until the first child with the title of first stage martial artist came on stage, the atmosphere was suddenly pushed to the highest point. What is the first stage martial artist's rating standard? That is to be able to make a complete set of Arhut fist in actual combat. It's not some tortoise fist, nor is it a random fight, but a real punch and kick, thoroughly using Arhut fist in actual combat. As the saying goes, 7 stars of Arhut, step by step ding ding. Moving left and rushing right, fast as the wind, left and right meteors rushing to the chest. Don't go up, don't go down. Hammer in the center. Become 8 trigrams. 2 hands out of the chest. Gods and ghosts don't dare to come. As more and more martial artists entered the stage, the children who were only fighting based on their primitive instincts were quickly defeated. The 5th grade competition was already quite valuable, so the teachers couldn't help but have more expectations for the 6th grade children. They only hoped to see an exciting battle between dragons and tigers. For this reason, the principal had even transferred 2 cameramen to record this year's martial arts competition in all aspects. She only hoped that the 6th grade children's performance would not disappoint her. The result was just as everyone expected. Because their minds were more mature, the 6th grade children's punches were naturally much smoother than those of the lower grades. Their moves were also more methodical. Finally, it was the turn of the contestants from Year 6 Class 2 to take the stage. Zhao Yu was in front of Nian Nian, and her appearance brought the atmosphere to a climax. A girl. She was the first girl to go on stage. Moreover, Zhao Yu's figure was tall, and her chest was slightly bulging. Therefore, the moment she went on stage, the boy opposite her immediately blushed and didn't dare to look at her again. What needs to be mentioned here is, because of the intentions of the teachers of each class, there were basically no girls participating in this year's martial arts competition. The lack of participants also caused the competition to be unable to split into male and female groups. So Nianyan and Zhao Yu's opponents were both boys. Different from Nianyan's immaturity, Zhao Yu's body already had a bit of the unique charm of a young girl. Children nowadays matured early, and because of her wealthy family background, Zhao Yu secretly learned how to put on makeup a long time ago on the internet. Although her makeup skills were not very good, compared to a group of primary school students, she was still too dazzling. Therefore, when Zhao Yu went on stage, many of the brats in the audience seemed to have been injected with chicken blood, and shouted excitedly. Year 6 Class 1 Lu Hao, please advise. Year 6 Class 2 Zhao Yu, please advise. Under the guidance of the referee, the two children bowed to each other and introduced themselves, and Zhao Yu made the first move. Although the boy was also a Dan warrior, he seemed to adhere to the concept of a straight man who did not hit a woman. Even when Zhao Yu used a standard set of punches and kicks, he still did not have the slightest intention of fighting back. Seeing this, Zhao Yu was not surprised at all, and instead took advantage of the situation to attack fiercely. She suddenly bent down, and with a sweep of her leg, kicked the boy directly to the ground, then jumped up high, and at the same time, bent her elbow to fiercely punch the boy's chest with the tip of her elbow. Stop! When the referee felt that something was wrong, he sternly shouted to stop, but the boy was already lying on the ground holding his chest and groaning in pain. Although he was wearing protective gear, Zhao Yu's somersault punch still hurt him. Zhao Yu victory! After confirming that the boy's injury was not serious, the referee announced the result of the competition. It would be best if Nianyan lowered her head and admitted defeat. This way, he wouldn't be criticized for bullying girls, and at the same time, he could get back his girlfriend's dignity. Compared to Hao Jie's fierceness, Nianyan's reaction was a little cute. Although she didn't understand why Hao Jie was so hostile to her, she knew what it meant to give her the middle finger. Therefore, Nianyan pouted unhappily. Match start. The referee didn't notice Hao Jie's little action. When he saw that the two young contestants were in position, he blew the whistle. The match started. In front of the entire school, Hao Jie still had some restraint. Therefore, he didn't immediately rush towards Nianyan. Instead, he stood on the spot and waved at Nianyan. Seeing this, Nianyan didn't hold back. She only heard a "ah yeah" to boost her courage, and then stupidly rushed towards Hao Jie. Here's what needs to be mentioned. For safety reasons, the school forced every child to wear boxing gloves. Nianyan had always been practicing palm techniques, so when she got close to Hao Jie, she stupidly used her fist instead of her palm, and directly threw a punch towards Hao Jie's face. Aya! This silly child. Didn't you see that he was already in a blocking stance? She actually went to feed others moves like this? As the most discerning spectator, Xianxia sat on the rooftop, stroking Big Cat while commenting on Nianyan's moves. Sure enough. Before Xianxia finished, Hao Jie raised his left arm to block Nianyan's fist. At the same time, he swung his right fist and punched towards Nianyan's lower abdomen. This move was the fourth style of Arhut fist, clear the clouds and see the sun. Because she was wearing protective clothing, Nianyan didn't suffer any damage from Hao Jie's punch, but the judges on the platform all took out pens to record it. Like all sports, the judges would give points based on the child's performance, and the one with the higher score would win. Because Nianyan could still stand, the judge didn't immediately blow the whistle, but instead signaled for both sides to continue the competition. Hao Jie seemed to have some experience in martial arts competitions. Therefore, before Nianyan could recover, he immediately withdrew his fist, and then kicked the outside of Nianyan's calf. This was good. Even though she was wearing protective gear, Nianyan still fell to the mat because of her unstable center of gravity. Whoosh! After the sharp whistle sounded, Hao Jie immediately stopped and took 3 steps back. He had successfully knocked down his opponent. According to the referee's scoring rules, this kick should be worth 3 points, right? Chen Nian, can you still stand? Do you want to admit defeat? The judge quickly stepped forward to help Nian Nian up, and at the same time asked with concern. She was a child, after all, it was normal for her to admit defeat. Chapter 557. Why didn't Xianxia directly teach Nian Nian sword techniques and immortal methods, but let her start from practicing martial arts like an ordinary person? That was because Xianxia didn't want Nian Nian to become too different. Perhaps many people couldn't understand this point of view, but as long as you put yourself in his shoes, it was actually very easy to understand. Humans were social creatures. Xianxia was no exception, and Nian Nian was no exception. If a person didn't have friends, then how lonely would she be? That kind of loneliness that always lingered in one's heart could sometimes actually kill a person. Like other children, Nian Nian also had many friends. Xiaoyu grew up in the same courtyard, the twin brothers grew up on the same street, and then Li Sanduo and Li Tangyue, who were in the same class. Xianxia was old. Nian Nian was still very young. Her friends would only increase. However, how many of her friends could keep up with her fast pace? They were clearly good friends who grew up together. In the blink of an eye, Nian Nian, with the halo of a genius, jumped one level after another in school. Nian Nian was already in the 6th grade. The two brothers who were once close to her were now still in the 3rd grade. This change was not obvious at first, but as Nian Nian gradually adapted to the life of the 6th grade and began to try to integrate into this new environment, it was destined that she had to say goodbye to her yesterday. The once close relationship was now gradually drifting apart. It was not because someone had changed again. It was because everyone had grown up again. Compared to the long life of an immortal cultivator, the ignorant childhood was too short and precious. Xianxia didn't want to deprive Nian Nian of her childhood with the inherent concept of cultivating as early as possible, because this would only lead to the loss of a child's childhood. Thinking about it carefully, wasn't Qin Shueqing a typical case of childhood loss? Sister, come on, beat him down. In the crowd, the two brothers didn't care about the strange gazes of the surrounding students at all and cheered for Nian Nian at the top of their lungs. The two of them had already shouted loudly enough. However, Nian Nian was so focused that she didn't hear the two brothers' shouts at all. This was the first time she had fought with someone. It was obviously impossible to say that she wasn't nervous in her heart. Therefore, after taking off the gloves on her hands, Nian Nian immediately followed Xianxia's usual teachings and directly assumed the posture of an elbow wrap. What was cloud hand? In ancient scrolls often used a spiral shape to represent the rotation of clouds in the wind. There was also a very elegant combination of hand in the classic dance. This set of skills was a combination of painting and dance moves, so it was named cloud hand. What needed to be mentioned here was martial arts was divided into external style and SS external styles focused arts as his hand. There was no superiority and inferiority. S's masters a masters to master. And this was what the older generation often said: train the muscles, bones, and skin externally, and train the breath internally. Most of the Arhut fist's moves were fierce and forceful. It was the standard external style, so how Jez's attack looked fierce. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, the truth will be known. Nian Nian had just assumed her's fighting stance, and the referee's interest was immediately piqued. Looking at her stance, this kid seemed to have some skill. Just now, because the gloves were too much of a hindrance, Nian Nian was defeated by Hao Jie the moment she came up, so she naturally felt a little unconvinced. That round didn't count. Start over. Fighting with a little girl already made Hao Jie feel a little embarrassed. But after the opponent fell, she still put on an unconvinced look, which made Hao Jie feel a little annoyed. Kids at this age were the most prideful. Unconvinced? Then I'll beat you until you're convinced. Hence, the moment the referee's whistle sounded, Hao Jie seemed to have eaten gunpowder, and rushed towards Nian Nian. Maybe he wanted to use this to establish his dominance, so Hao Jie didn't use his Arhut fist this time, but took out his famous ultimate move, flying kick. Hao Jie! Seeing Hao Jie jump high and kick towards Nian Nian, the teachers couldn't sit still. With this kick, wouldn't Nian Nian be sent flying out of the arena? The principal was still watching from above. How could this kid not know his limits? From the moment Hao Jie sped up and jumped to the moment the teachers shouted to stop, Everything happened in the blink of an eye. But just when everyone thought that Nian would be sent flying by Hao Jie's kick, an unexpected scene suddenly happened. In actual fact, if her reaction was fast enough, Nian could totally avoid Hao Jie's flashy flying kick. But, instead of dodging, she immediately bent her knees and got into a horse stance, then swung her arms like willow branches by the river. It looked messy, but it actually had a deeper meaning. As expected. Just when Hao Jie's right leg was about to hit Nian suddenly hugged his right leg, then borrowed the force from Hao Jie's leg to spin in a circle, then threw Hao Jie out of the arena. Ayo! Get up! You're crushing my leg! Perhaps it was because Hao Jie used too much force, but after his body fell onto the mat, he rolled a few times on the mat. He only stopped when he hit the audience on the side. Xiao! Hao Jie has gone out of bounds. Chen Yan wins. After the sharp whistle sounded, the referee announced the result of this round's competition. No one would have thought that Hao Jie would lose in such a way. The teachers didn't understand the twists and turns, and only thought that Hao Jie accidentally flew out of the arena because he wanted to look cool. But the referee at the side understood the crux of the matter, so he directly declared Chen Yan the winner. How was this a mistake? In the face of Hao Jie's flying kick, not only did Chen Yan not dodge, he even seized the opportunity at the crucial moment of his opponent's mistake. Taking advantage of the situation, he used Hao Jie's strength to successfully turn it into his own and threw Hao Jie out of the ring. This was a competition, not a duel. It was based on the performance of both parties. Nian got 1 point for not panicking in the face of danger, 1 point for not dodging, and 1 point for the correct response. But Hao Jie, not only did he fail to show off, he even fell out of bounds. This kind of performance was basically enough to get a negative score. This was the referee's evaluation criteria. Just based on this move alone, Chen Yan deserved to win. This was a martial arts competition, so naturally, one couldn't just compete with brute force, but also with brains. Flying kick in the air? The move was cool, but could it hit someone? The referee had his own evaluation criteria, so after announcing this round's result, he immediately signaled for the next round's contestants to take their places. Although the teachers didn't understand the strength of the move, after hearing the referee's judgment, they still led the crowd in cheering for Nian. They really didn't expect this. This little girl could actually win against Hao Jie. Everyone was congratulating Nian. But at this moment, a very discordant voice suddenly sounded. This isn't fair. There's a conspiracy. The referee blew a black whistle. I don't accept this. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.